Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Northern Utah RAC meeting. Today is December 1st, 2021. It is 6 p.m. and I call this meeting to order. This meeting is being held in person in the Weber County Commission chambers in Ogden, Utah, as well as being streamed on YouTube. This is the public forum allowing you to express your opinions and proposals on the management of wildlife in our state. This RAC considers your ideas, opinions, and proposals and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is charged with setting wildlife policy for our state. We all have ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah's wildlife, and we approach this with tremendous emotion and passion. I encourage all who wish to express their opinion to do so. However, I ask that you respect opposing views on issues being discussed. I would appreciate that the audience keep their emotions in check, allowing all individuals to freely express their opinions. Appropriate conduct will help provide smooth meeting flow, allowing the RAC to listen, digest, and address all concerns, opinions, and proposals offered for consideration. Rude comments, booing, yelling, hooting, or snickering from the audience while individual comments are being offered will not be tolerated. If inappropriate behavior persists, an offender may be asked to leave the meeting. Again, we want to thank everyone for being here today, and we'll start by introducing ourselves. And I'm going to begin on to my right with David Earl, your name and the group that you represent.
David Earl, Ag.
Brad Buchanan, Sportsman.
Randy Hutchison, at large.
Kevin McLeod, at large.
Mike Lauder, Sportsman.
Let's do that one more time.
Junior Goring, wool growers and ag.
Casey Snyder, elected official.
All right, I'm going to go in the order that I see your faces on the screen. I'm going to start with, we have Nikki Wayment. It's kind of redundant, but I'll have you state your name and who you represent.
Nikki Wayment, non-consumptive.
Okay, Darren, you're next.
Darren Perry, Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation.
All right. Jamie.
Hi there, I'm Jamie Butler from Westminster College, and I represent non-consumptive users.
Perfect. Matthew.
Matt Clark, Ogden, at large.
All right. And Paul Chase.
Paul Chase, Forest Service, out of Logan.
Perfect. Thank you. And we have two members who are excused today, Emily Jensko and Ryan Brown. We also want to welcome the DWR staff, specifically those that provided presentations and are available to answer questions throughout the meeting. We have Wyatt Bubach, Law Enforcement Chief, Colby Jones, Big Game Coordinator, and Darren DuBois, Mammals Coordinator. Also want to recognize we have a member of our Wildlife Board here. We have Bryce Thurgood. And again, we thank everyone for being here. We welcome the public that are here in the meeting and also those who are watching this as it's being streamed on YouTube. Those that are attending in person will have the opportunity to provide comments regarding any agenda item. If you wish to make a comment, you must fill out a comment card for the item that you wish to address and make sure that we get it to us. Those comment cards are in the back. Once you have one, if you would bring it forward, and we probably have you hand it to Jody to my right, and then she'll make sure it gets to us as we approach those agenda items. The public that are watching on YouTube will not be able to provide live comments during the meeting. However, the presentations were provided for viewing online, and the public was able to provide comments to the RAC members for us to be able to read and to help with our decisions. Our meeting will go as followed. The protocol. Should we just go through our update and then go over the protocol? Would that be your call? As we do, the protocol will go as followed. We will begin. We'll have the presenter, the division employee, will come up. At that time, there'll be questions. The RAC will be able to ask questions. After the RAC has asked questions, we'll turn time over to the public to ask questions. Once questions are done, then we will have comments from the RAC and also from the public. After those are done, we'll entertain motions, and we'll we will follow that procedure on each item. So to begin the meeting, we are going to, first, I would hope that everyone had an opportunity to see the minutes and the agenda, and I'd entertain a proposal on both the minutes and the agenda for tonight. Our last month's minutes and tonight's agenda.
I'd move to approve the minutes and the agenda.
The motion from Randy to approve the minutes and the agenda. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
And a second from Brad. All right. Should we do a vote? I guess we need to, right? All right, we'll go ahead and vote to approve these. We'll start with David Earl.
In favor?
Brad?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Junior?
Yes.
Casey?
Yes.
All right, I've got on my list here, I'm going to go with Matt,
Yes.
Nikki,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
and Paul.
Yes.
All right. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. This time we don't have, we have not yet had the Wildlife Board meeting for last month's proposal, so there's nothing to report. Next meeting we'll report for both the Wildlife Board meeting concerning last month's topics and this one as well. So this time I'm going to turn some time over to Ben, who will give us a regional update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Ben Nadolski. I'm the Regional Supervisor for the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources Northern Region. While they're pulling up the presentation, I'll just remind the public that tomorrow's board meeting is not in its usual location of the DNR headquarters. It'll be at the Farmington Bay Eccles Wildlife Education Center. So just in case any of you are looking to head that way, make sure you head the right way. So thanks. Looks like we got our presentation. I'll just give a really brief Northern Region update for a few things that are going on. It wasn't long that we met, so I don't have a whole lot to share, but just to highlight a couple things. Next slide, Mike. We did mention in our wildlife section, we did have some aerial captures coming up. We made the invite and had a couple takers. Jamie and Randy both joined us for a day on deer captures, and appreciate your help. Sounds like they both had fun and met a lot of our people. I really enjoy spending time with partners out on these projects because it gives us an opportunity not only to work side by side, but there's time in between to have informal conversations and build relationships. So appreciate you guys making that effort to do that. We did start in Rich County. We had 2 does that we recaptured, new does that we put collars on, and 7 new fawns. We moved to Harbor Ranch yesterday. 5 recaptured does were processed. 3 new does were collared, and 10 new fawns. And today they wrapped up at the Richmond WMA with 3 recaptured does and 3 new fawn collars. It sounds like, comparing the data from this year to last year, just to steal something from a text I got from Jim, it sounds like we're making the cash great again. So things are on the up and up. Conditions good. Survival looks to be good. I won't give too much detail until we get the data fully fleshed out, but things look promising on that front so far. Next slide, Mike. We do still have a couple captures coming up. We got the Morgan, South Rich, and East Canyon. December 12th, 13th is the target date for that. Certainly weather can change that, but that's the goal. Looking to capture 30 deer on that one, and then we'll follow up on the box elder December 14th to 16th. 30 deer there and 15 pronghorn as well. Again, weather dependent for those dates, but would love if you guys want to come out again for those that came out, but those that weren't able to, we'd love to see you. If you can make either of those projects. As we get closer to them, I'll be sending out reminders to RAC members and invites with details. So thanks. In addition to the aerial captures, we've got deer classifications that are ongoing. So far, the fawn to doe ratio seems to be similar to 2020, and the buck to doe ratio is higher than 2020. So there's some of the details of how things are looking up. Last week of releasing pheasants right now, we've had people out and letting a lot of birds go, doing it in the dark so they don't get don't get popped for doing it. But a lot of people, there's a lot of demand for that, and our employees are working a lot of hours to make sure those opportunities are out there for folks. We'll be doing a bighorn sheep survey on the Newfies, or we did it last week, and I don't have any results on that, but Jim's giving me a thumbs up, so that's good. Okay, next one. Of course, the big news for the region recently is our acquisition of the soon-to-be or now Cinnamon Creek Wildlife Management Area. This is a really, really generational opportunity that we, and when I say we, I don't mean just the division, we collectively as partners in the conservation community really came together and made sure we secured for the future of wildlife conservation. It just so happened to fall on my birthday when the news broke. I just tell you, thank you. But I just felt like, what better birthday news could a guy get, but what better news could the public get? If you'll go to the next slide, it's over 8,000 acres that are going to be protected and managed for the benefit of the public and benefit of wildlife. And it's a really important piece of property that we got from the School Institutional Trust Lands Administration that is going to provide a really critical future for the Ogden unit, especially. And it becomes the 193rd wildlife management area in Utah. So a big thank you to all of those who worked on it, many of which are in this room. There really can't be enough praise and thanks for the collective effort of the community that brought that across the finish line. We did offer, other way. We did have a beginner pheasant hunt out at Ogden Bay. We reached out to 800 new hunters via email. We had 51 new hunters that attended. The reports that I heard was that provided the best pheasant hunt to date. So at least the best first pheasant hunt opener that we've had. This has been another partner project with support from sportsmen's organizations and Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife. And it's just important that that we recognize our collective contributions to these kinds of efforts and the memories that people made taking advantage of these opportunities. So big thanks for that. That's all I've got for the regional update. I don't have a slide for the Swan update, but I understand there might be some discussion on that tonight. So I'll leave it open for you if you guys want to talk.
Matter of fact, we'll leave this mic on.
Okay.
Can I just? So I just going to ask if any information is known. It came out this past week that the swan hunt was ended 3 weeks early. And I believe this is the third year in a row that's ended early. Is that correct?
Hey, Randy, can you talk into your microphone, please?
Okay. So and I would assume that this is going to come up in the board meeting tomorrow. But I'm just going to throw it out there just because I have the mic and I can. This is something I really, really hope the division looks at. This is something that needs to be addressed. A lot of hunters lost 3 weeks. That's a quarter of the season, if I remember correctly, and that's just not acceptable. I would hope that there are various alternatives that are being looked at so that it can be addressed. I know it can't be fixed overnight, but we have people clearly targeting, and I know people that are clearly targeting the trumpeters. And that's just stealing opportunities from the other people that have the permits that are sitting out there. So just going to throw that out there. I know we're waiting for information to come in on how many permits are still out there and that type of thing. So I'm not going to try to drag that out of anybody, but I hope that's something that comes up. And I bet it comes up in the board meeting tomorrow, but I hope that's something that gets addressed.
This is Matt Clark. I can speak a little bit to this if after Ben has his say.
Go ahead.
But I don't think that Blair is here, but he and I have been talking about this in the last couple of weeks or so. It is true that this is clearly a targeting issue. This is not novice hunters that are accidentally taking trumpeter swans. They're being deliberately targeted. And according to Blair, these are people with big boats, head-to-toe Sitka gear. They're experienced water hunters doing this on purpose. And the information that I had from Blair was that about 50% of the quota is coming off of either public shooting grounds or the private clubs that are immediately adjacent to them. And so they opened up public shooting grounds to swan hunting 3 years ago, and they've met quota and closed the season down all 3 years. I do remember that meeting. I do remember voting to open that up. That does appear to have been a mistake. And I think the easiest short-term fix, in my opinion, is to revert to the original boundaries and eliminate swan hunting on public shooting grounds and those adjacent clubs. Because again, that's 50% of where the take is coming from. Furthermore, Blair mentioned last meeting that they're doing isotope studies on feather samples, and the hope and their expectation is that these are not Yellowstone birds. These are coming down from Alaska. And in the long term, if these are truly coming down from Alaska, there's the potential to eliminate the quota for tundra swans or for trumpeter swans, because they are primarily interested in protecting that Yellowstone bird. So everything is set for next year with the flyway. So hopefully the year after, they might be able to eliminate the quota, but we're still going to need to do something for the season coming up next year. And I think we probably would have addressed this last meeting, but it wasn't apparent how big of an issue the targeting was. So I'm hopeful that the board will address that tomorrow. And my opinion is that closing public shooting grounds will eliminate 50% of the trumpeter take.
Chair, if I could add to the comments, everybody's making incredibly valid points, and everything that Matt shared is accurate. I think the position we're in right now is, none of us like to see anybody lose opportunity, especially when we've, set up an opportunity for those opportunities. And so I think it's something that the division has taken really seriously. There's not any complacency on our side about the issue. I think where maybe there's a disconnect is not only do we not want to take away opportunity from folks, but we also don't want to contribute to misguided science or misguided management. And so the way that we guide management and the decisions that we make, especially when we're talking about a species that has this kind of history, is we do this with data. And I think we can all agree that we want to come into it with the best data that we possibly can, so that we can make the best case that we possibly can for whatever it is best for Utah and Utah's hunters. In the case of swans, like Matt said, we collected feathers throughout the harvest season. We had to cut it short, just like Randy mentioned. But by collecting those feathers, by collecting the collar data or the banding information, we can get a good handle on where these birds are coming from. And that's the kind of data that we're going to need to present to the flyway to make a case for whatever it is we think is best for not only for swans, but for Utah's hunting public. And so the challenge is it's not completely in our court. It's a bird that ranges a lot bigger than just Utah. There's federal implications for the management, and we do need to work through the Flyway Council on this. The Flyway Council is going to want to see the data and make a database decision, but their recommendation is going to go to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we're going to need to make sure we present them with the best case possible. So it is going to take us a little bit of time, but as these issues have continued through this past season, we have been arming ourselves with those opportunities with information. So I just wanted to say, we'll get into more details tomorrow, I'm sure, in the board meeting. But on behalf of the division, or at least for me, just wanted to relay to the public that it's not something that we're complacent about. We're very aware of it, and we're preparing diligently to make sure we can address it. Matt mentioned one way that we could go about resolving it if we can't do it through the flyway. Local regulation might be necessary at some point, but we've heard a lot of good ideas on how best to do it. And I think that we've got some good options to vet if we can't do it through the Flyway Council and through the Fish and Wildlife Service. So if you guys can bear with us and have a little more patience too, we're going to put our best foot forward and try to do the best management we possibly can.
All right. Do we have any other questions as far as the update? or any comments? Again, I would just was able to attend and help volunteer on that youth pheasant hunt. It was a great time, and also got a chance to see the volunteers and how much they work to get those pheasants out there. And Angie's not here that works with SFW, but holy cow, is she out there? It's rain. I went out there, pouring rain. She's covered in mud, and it's not mud that's on her. You know, let's say that. You don't want to lick your fingers when you're done catching those birds, but it was just the amount of work that SFW's put into it, you know, and their volunteers, and then to see the division employees work together, and to see, I don't live too far from there. I'm hearing the shooting, and there has been a lot more shooting this year than there has in the past. So I think it's been very successful. I think it's awesome. I also noticed that we have another wildlife board member that snuck in. I didn't see him. Brett Selman's here also in attendance. So we thank him for coming. And so that's good. We have 2 wildlife board members present that just heard our concerns with the swans. And I think they'll bring that back and hopefully discuss it tomorrow. All right. With that, is there any other questions or comments before we move to the next item on the agenda? All right. With that, we'll go ahead. This is an informational only, but we'll have Wyatt is here. Ubach, we'll have him come up. And then if you have any questions for him, hopefully everyone had the opportunity to watch his presentation on emerging technologies and the survey. So now is your time to ask. We'll begin with RAC members. Now is your time to ask questions to Wyatt. Go ahead, Randy.
Hey, Wyatt, you're going to have a fun week or two, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, hey, just a quick question. I got to your slide presentation, and I appreciate that very much. One of your slides that I liked a lot, and it's not numbered, so I apologize. It's the summary of questions. Okay. So one of the questions that I would have liked to have seen on there that wasn't, and maybe you know the number, and if you don't, that's fine. But one of the survey questions was, would you support a Nevada style rules? Do you know what that score was, and where would it fall on this scale?
I don't. So quickly to summarize, weighted averages is basically like gauging how strongly. Is it on now? Perfect. So weighted averages kind of gauge the strength of support or opposition. And so in that pie graph where we talked about the Nevada support, it just lumped, slightly support or strongly support into the support side. So I don't readily know where that falls. I can search through some other slides towards the end of this that may have additional information, but it doesn't look like they're there on my version. So I don't know the weighted average of that and exactly how strongly they would support that.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I was looking at the survey. It was Jamie, you have a question? Go ahead.
Hey, yeah, I have a question. And I wanted to make a comment that it was a really great presentation, and I was totally nerding out on all of your data. And I just want to commend you and give you a lot of kudos for how much energy that you put into the surveys. I just have a couple of questions. I know that you talked about the idea of taking, and that this only applied to the taking of wildlife. Does it apply to research cameras on Gunnison Island, Wasatch Wildlife Watch, where we're working with the DWR? Are the rules pretty specific for taking?
Yeah, that may be better geared towards Covey's, but I can speak to it. Covey's presentation will cover the big game rule changes, but
Okay.
yeah, it'd be specific to taking. So recreational photography, research type stuff would not be covered by that.
I think I think that's all for now. I'll ask the rest of Covey.
I think I know the answer to this, but on the survey where it says trail camera usage, I thought it was interesting that we have scouting and then we have hunting. So are we saying that the scouting is before the seasons began and hunting would be once the seasons did begin? Is that the difference?
That'd be a safe way to assume it, that they're actually using it through the hunting season more so than just preseason scouting. And I would go specifics through the hunting season in which they possess a tag for, I should specify.
Is there any other questions for members of the RAC forum? Any questions from anyone in the public, anyone in the audience? All right.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I wouldn't go too far.
What I figured.
Is that better, Jamie? You can now hear us? It's back. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted Kevin, so I hopefully you can remember where he was at.
Well, yeah, I was just asking a question about the survey question. It says, do you oppose or support additional restrictions on long-range rifle equipment? To me, that could be a question that doesn't apply to hunting.
Sure.
Just the equipment. So like I say, if I were asked that question, I would say, yeah, I'm not really opposed to equipment, but I certainly am opposed to long-range hunting.
Yeah, so the presentation doesn't necessarily relay exactly how the question was worded. So I'm trying to quickly search through some files to see if I can find exactly how that question was worded. If you give me 1 second, I'm hopeful I can find it. So I just had our social scientist just texted me and said that weighted average for the first question was 3.1.
Thank you.
Yep, and I think I found this other survey. One second. Would you oppose or support additional restrictions on the following types of long-range weapons? The question was asked in context of hunting, but the question itself did not include hunting. But I would suspect that the responses we got were pertaining to hunting, although it doesn't specifically spell that out in the question.
Okay, thank you.
I do see what you're talking about.
This is Matt Clark speaking. I have an additional question while you're up here. The Central Region made a pretty big deal about whether or not trail cameras count as night vision devices yesterday, because they are primarily operating at night, and they actually had a motion to specifically exclude them from the night vision device wording in the rule. I'm assuming that your position is still the same, that those are separate and we don't need a separate motion on that?
Yeah, in talking to our attorney generals, they feel that because it has a standalone definition, it excludes it from a previous definition. They did make a motion on that, and I don't know that we have a strong opinion on if we clarify that in the night vision definition if needed.
Okay.
Can I ask
Do you have
another
any other-
question?
Yes.
I was curious about this idea of like private property on public land. So like putting somebody's private property on like public land and like leaving it there is like, are there other rules that regulate that? I'm just curious how that like works.
Are you talking like putting a camera on public property and leaving it there?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, like
so-
because and I'm coming from a place of like I have no idea.
Yeah, so we investigate reports of, for example, hunting blinds may be left for extended period of time on public property, and we have been successful in taking the stance that the individual who took those items should understand that it is an abandoned property and that it should be expected that someone is coming back for them. And so as far as theft or things of that nature, we've been successful on those, understanding that every situation is different, and we just have to measure those factors.
I think Paul also has he might be able to help us as far as the Forest Service goes. He has his hand up.
Well, I'll probably just muddy the water a little bit more for y'all. We're looking at trail cameras. It's been an issue for us also. Our law enforcement's kind of taking the lead on this, so I'm certainly not the expert. But we know we have cameras that have been sitting in the same place for 3+ years. And at some point in time, they're going to start disappearing and just considered abandoned property, just like other things that are left on the forest. So how long that sits there before that happens, that's the kind of debate where we are now.
Yeah, on our end, I don't know that there's certainly not anything definitive in law that I'm aware of that would designate when something's viewed as abandoned or not. And kind of goes back to why every situation we deal with on that regard is handled differently.
Justin.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Randy.
That question made me think of something else. So if, just to keep things simple, if we end up going through and approving the division's proposal right now, and you had a transmitting camera out there after, I think it's July 31st, what are the results? Would that camera be removed?
As far as the enforcement side of things, with the way the rule's written, we'd need to prove that that camera is being used in the attempt to take of a big game species. It'd be similar to the way that bait is currently being enforced, in that it's not illegal to bait, just like it's not illegal to have a camera in general on the landscape under the way that this rule's proposed. It's just illegal to, in the case of bait, take big game over that bait. And in the way that the camera verbiage is written, to use that camera in the aid to take big game or take big game.
Okay, so that, I actually wish you hadn't said that, because now I have 20,000 questions. So if you have a transmitting camera out there, and again, let's just stay with the proposal. During the season, it's being used.
Could be being used for recreational purposes, research, things of that nature that aren't tied to the take of big game.
Okay, that will change any proposals I make. Thanks.
So basically, if you were to come across one, you would then contact, the division, and then you'd give a coordinate where it's at, and then they would investigate the purpose of it used and then go from there. Okay.
Which is very similar to what we're dealing with bait currently.
But how do you prove one way or the other if it's being used?
Yeah, we'd set up and monitor that, whether someone's coming to visit that, or we develop some level of probable cause in order to look further into that, whether that's let's say a tree stand in the area, reason to believe that someone is hunting or using that for scouting or whatever it may be. We just would need to establish that probable cause to look into that further.
Okay. That was enlightening. Thank you.
I think Casey has a question.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of follow up because I think some of those questions that were raised are consistent with my own. So, so under the proposal, you have to determine probable cause based on a variety of factors. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, let me take a step back. Ben, this is more of the big game rule. Do you want me to address this here, or do you want to wrap up the conversation of the survey and then we can talk through
Well,
this?
sorry, and I can withdraw my question if it's more appropriate to have it later.
It probably fits better later. but
I'll withdraw
We'll
that.
probably have to bring Wyatt back up.
But you're not off the hook.
Yeah. Didn't expect I would.
Yeah. Let's make Covey answer that one.
Okay. As mentioned, I think a lot of this will tie into the our next agenda item. So is there any other questions as far as the survey goes or anything else before we move to that next agenda item?
So I believe the Central Region did give the public opportunity.
Yeah, I do. Sorry, I
They
do.
did.
What,
I think I was wrong.
they did give it?
Yeah,
Do you want to?
yeah. it's up to you.
I'm going to turn some time over to Ben to give what the public feedback was on this survey.
Sorry, I meant to say that the Central Region RAC gave the public an opportunity to ask
Oh.
questions and give comments on this item.
All right.
So if that's what you'd
I
like
did
to do, you
ask
can
for,
do that.
I did ask for questions from the public, but I didn't ask
Oh.
if there's any comments from
Okay.
the public. So I did ask for, okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
Sorry, I misunderstood. So yeah, with that, we'll go ahead and thank you, Wyatt. As I said, I don't think you'll be going too far, but we'll go ahead to the next agenda item and we'll ask Colby Jones to please come up and go over. He'll be here for questions or first, hopefully, again, everyone had the opportunity to watch his presentation and we'll begin with the RAC to ask questions. And then after the RAC, we'll allow the public to ask questions. All right, Casey.
All right, Wyatt.
I'm, yes.
Come here, Wyatt. Okay, so just as a follow-up, so we were talking about during your survey, some of the issues relative to probable cause. And basically the onus or burden of proof being on the division relative to whether or not a transmitting camera placed on the landscape was used in the take of big game. So my question for you from a law enforcement perspective is it easier to sort of ascertain what the intention of the person with a camera was, or would it be easier to have more something at a seasonal level where the camera could or could not be there and something to that degree?
Yeah, so on the enforcement side of things, if it was black and white, it'd be easier to have it banned, where any camera, regardless of the purpose on the landscape was, or in this case, transmitting cameras, an outright ban for any purpose would be easier on the enforcement side of things.
Okay, thank you. That was my question.
Stay there just for a sec.
But you got to put that up.
So now there's not a proposal for this, but I figured this is a more appropriate time to talk about it. One of the questions was about long-range equipment. And I mean, obviously it's implied long-range hunting from my perspective. If something like that had been proposed, is there any enforcement mechanism on something like
As
that?
far as the ability to shoot various weapon systems at range?
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd largely have to be tied to equipment, power scopes, slider sights on bows, those types of things. So it wouldn't be the ethical side as far as like limiting them to a distance. It would be likely have to be done through the management of the equipment in which they're using.
Okay, thanks.
We can't let him fire away with questions for Colby.
Do we want to go in the order of the things on the agenda? Or just the whole proposal?
Well, I think it would be,
We're on the big game rule amendments right now.
Yeah.
yeah, so we're there. So just on,
Maybe let's just talk about the trail cameras first. I mean, that's going to be probably the biggest one.
I like that. If that's all right, we'll begin by asking any questions that you have considering anything to do with trail cameras at this time and their proposal. Jamie?
It seems like technology is changing so much. When is this rule going to be reviewed? Is this like an every year thing? How do you decide when to review it?
That's a really good question. So there's a couple parts to that. One is, when is the big game rule going to be reviewed? And the other one is, when is technology going to be reviewed? Did they just go away? Oh, they're back. Okay. So we had our wildlife board come to us this last year, and they asked us, they said, listen, we feel like, same thing you said, we feel like technology is changing so fast. We want a presentation from the division annually on emerging technologies. We want to know how hunting is changing annually. And so that was a commitment we made this year. So starting this year, every year we will bring out a presentation on what we're seeing, what our law enforcement, what our biologists, what we're seeing in the field. You know, a perfect example here is like night vision. Night vision's been around forever, but it hasn't been at a price point where anybody could afford it. And so we've seen this really emerge in hunting the last couple of years. And that's why we decided to address it now. So that's the long explanation. The short answer is we will address it. We'll address emerging technology and make appropriate changes annually.
I have
The big
another
game rule
question.
comes out about every other year usually. Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you so much. Do you, I guess, I don't know if this is right. Do you see this as an equity issue? Like, can some people afford a camera and some people can't afford a camera? And there's kind of this equity issue. How do you view that?
I guess I probably don't see it as an equity issue because I've never thought of it that way. So I see it as sportsmen have always been trying to regulate themselves. I mean, with unlimited harvest and unlimited take and market hunting, which is where the U.S. started, you end up with extirpation and even extermination of species. And so, the North American wildlife model that was developed said that they decided we're gonna regulate how we do this through best management practice, through science. And fair chase is a really important part of that. Like, what does fair chase mean? And it's something that as agency folks, we're always thinking about. And so it's probably less about equity of who can and who can't, and more about what is sporting and what is fair. And I get that that's subjective. That's why this is a public process, right? Tonight, we're not talking necessarily about the biology of these herds, or we're talking about what is acceptable socially. And that's been a part of hunting for years. So.
Thank you. I think Casey has a question.
Thanks, Cody. So relative to this section, there's the exemptions for agricultural operations. Yes. I just want to make sure, because I think it's important. Does that include agricultural operations on public ground? So if I am a livestock owner and I'm making sure I have water in a trough, or I'm getting predated on by whatever, can I still utilize cameras under the proposed language? The way that we've written it is it exempts those purposes. Let me double check that. Yeah, so the language says, it specifically says private landowners monitoring or protecting property from trespass or monitoring active agricultural operations. So I just want to make sure that in the eyes of the division that includes private operators operating on public property. I actually probably think it doesn't, Casey. Okay. So maybe we need to possibly have address that as well. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Kevin first, and then then Paul, and then Nikki.
I just got a quick follow-up question, if I could, on that one. Because based on our last conversation, it sounds like if your camera isn't being used to help take or to hunt with, then it's probably allowed on public land still, right?
That's accurate. This is just regulating for the purposes of take. So, sorry, I guess I'll take back my previous statement, Casey. We're regulating this for the purposes of take. And so if it's there to monitor water for livestock, that wouldn't be there for, to take or aid in the take of big game.
I'm going to let Casey follow up.
If I don't want to step on anybody's question. So Paul, are you okay if I follow up?
No, that would be perfect.
Okay, thank you. So Kobe, just to clarify though, I'm not just speaking to a gate or a water trough level. I would be specifically on the depredation side as well. Not big game. Okay. But for taking of predators specifically. Okay, so let me back up and clarify then, Casey. So what you're asking is, if we had, because this is also in the cougar and bear rule, right? For the same overlapping time, if we had a cougar or bear depredate on domestic livestock, sometimes they'll use these cameras in order to ensure that they get the right cougar or bear removed. Right now, that's not exempted. We would need to create an exemption for that. And it wasn't our intent in writing this rule to impact livestock operators. And so we would certainly be okay with an exemption like that. Okay, thank you.
All right, Kevin.
So Covey, with a background in law enforcement, and you guys, I mean, this is an enforcement nightmare, or it could be. Have you thought about, or was it considered to require a permit to put a camera on public land? I know it would be tough on private, but even private, have you talked about that?
We actually did consider it. And again, I think you nailed it, Kevin. This is tricky, walking this line and what's allowed and as it relates to take, but a lot of wildlife regulations are really tricky. When we thought about that and came through that, and I'll answer it and then I'm going to make sure Wyatt is okay and doesn't have anything to add. But what it came down to is regulating through permit. The reason would be to limit the number probably, right? And then we'd end up with somebody has their 5 cameras and then their son or daughter has their 5 cameras, and then their wife or husband has his or her 5 cameras, and their uncle that doesn't hunt has his 5 cameras, and their aunt that lives in Nevada has her 5 cameras. And so we didn't feel like a permitting system would work to help regulate that number. It in and of itself, it became very complex very quickly as to what that meant and who could get permits and how many would be out on the landscape. And that's the reason why we didn't go down that road. Do you have anything to add to that, Wyatt?
That's good.
Okay.
Okay, Nikki, I believe you had a question.
Yeah, I'm curious. Jamie alluded to it a little bit earlier. Where does research fit in to this this subject matter, right? So a lot of the technology that hunters might be using to use as take options is the same technology that researchers like we are using at Hawkwatch to understand like roadkill interactions with golden eagles, for example. And so I'm wondering where everything kind of crosses. And as you've already said several times, it's a really complicated issue, but I'm wondering how research fits into this rule in addition to hunters.
As it relates back to because it relates back to the take of big game, and in this case, cougar and bear during this overlapping season time, it wouldn't impact or shouldn't negatively impact research at all. They'd be allowed to operate as they have been.
Great, thank you.
So we've had a lot of questions about the trail camera side of things. Is there any other questions concerning other technologies?
I think it's in this section. The hunter orange requirements with the youth hunt.
Yep, it's in this as well.
So at the same time, we can have archers in the field, correct? Youth any bull hunters, once in a lifetime hunters. So this would make, out of all that group, the youth hunters the only ones required to wear hunter orange?
Yeah, they're the ones operating in the center fire hunt. That's right.
So
This
if we can
changed.
exempt once in a lifetime hunters with center fire rifles, why are the youth singled out?
They're singled out and they get a special hunt, I guess, is the other side of that. But when we made this change, we just felt like that the real conflict was with the archers. And I understand the sentiment. Like I don't know that I don't know if there's a right or wrong on this one. You know, the rationale from the division, it was twofold. One, it's not a lot of hunters when you look at it statewide on all the general season any bull units, 500 youth hunters. And so we're always concerned about safety, but we didn't feel like we were at the densities where this was as big of an issue. So that's one of the reasons why I recommended this. And the second reason, just to be completely frank, is it is extremely difficult for officers to enforce the hunter orange requirement on archers as long as we have this overlap. So, you know, that's the rationale behind the recommendation. It's one of those where I don't know if there's a right or a wrong, but that's why we made it.
So when we talk about it in reference to safety, I'm just curious if there's any data out there that compares states like Idaho and safety incidents that don't require hunter orange.
I don't know if there is, you know, but there's always different situations. Like I was talking to a buddy who just got back from Nebraska, and he's like, not only was I fully dressed in hunter orange, but I wanted a flag. Like I wanted something to wave. And it's all that hunter density stuff. And you look at our hunter orange code, it was written when we had over 220,000 rifle hunters in the field. Like there's a density where this really, really matters. And so comparing it between states can be tough because we all hunt a little differently. But those are the types of considerations we had. Like what are the densities? What are the numbers on the landscape?
I just finally figured out why Utah complains about so many issues with density of pumpkin patch. Let's just not wear orange and we won't get all no one will know they were overcrowded. Problem solved.
Once again, Justin's fixing the world's problems. So thanks, Justin.
Okay. Any other question?
One more question. Since our questions are going beyond the trail cameras,
Sure.
just a quick question for you. So I have to preface this with a short comment. I apologize, Jody. I told Jody the other day that I would not cross questions and comments, but we didn't get near the feedback this go around for this subject as we did the first time. I think most of the public fell out of the loop, not realizing it came up.
Possibly. Yeah.
But so I'm going off memory, but I remember receiving a lot of emails and or feedback forms talking about muzzle loaders and the requirement to add powder and bullet from the muzzle. And I apologize, I forget the name. There's a hot rifle outfits
The
right now.
Fire Stick.
Fire Stick, thank you. Is there any idea of how common those are in use in Utah?
Absolutely no clue. Wyatt, do you have anything to add?
And the reason I'm bringing it up, because I remember several very hot emails that I got on this very subject. So it might be a very small, intense organization, but
You're fine. So I can't answer the question definitively with an actual number or how popular they are, but what I can speak to is it seems to me, and this is my opinion, that technology is kind of exponential, and we are just ahead of what could be an explosion as far as advances in muzzleloaders go. So while they may not be super prevalent right now on the landscape, the potential that they are in 5 years is certainly there.
Yeah, no, I understand the reason for the question in the
Sure.
survey, and I appreciate you guys doing it.
And I think the thing is, Randy, is that they're new, and so they're not super prevalent. Like, if I'm honest, like the percentage of folks using these in the field is very low.
This is Matt Clark. I mean, my memory of those emails, the majority of them came from the manufacturer or the manufacturer's representatives.
That is accurate. As I reviewed the comments from the last RAC, there were manufacturers and manufacturers representatives that said, please don't go this direction. Obviously, if you're producing a product, like I understand that rationale.
I should have read the signature line.
Kevin.
Along those same lines, I know that you mentioned the use of smokeless powder in muzzle loaders. Some of those comments I remember that were made that Randy was talked about how they could their son could more safely load the powder. I would hope that we never get to the point where we allow smokeless powder in a muzzle loader. I used to work for a firearms manufacturer, and I was challenged with blowing a muzzle loader up. We wanted to see what the tolerances were in a white muzzle loader. And I could not blow that gun up, even the breech plug out of it, with black powder, even with 2 balls and 2 bullets shoved in on top of it. I did blow it up with smokeless powder. So when we talk about safety issues and the use of smokeless powder, a double charge of smokeless powder in a muzzle loader is going to blow a breech plug right back in somebody's face. So just from experience, it's just along those lines.
I know that wasn't a question, but Kevin, I just want to say that sounds like a fascinating experiment. So
Yeah. I'll tell you about it when we've got a few minutes.
Sounds good.
It was in a blow-up box, and it blew the blow-up box apart.
Huh. Yeah, and I know that there are folks that load hot loads every year, and like a 7mm or whatever, and they'll blow those up with a cartridge. So you can do it. It is possible.
Okay, Jamie.
Thank you for entertaining all of my naive questions. I'm, used to brine shrimp and pelicans and working on the water. So thank you so much. It sounds like a lot of, how do you enforce all of this? Muzzle loaders, trail cameras, how does it almost sounds like it's a lot of people it's kind of self-regulated, that people are saying, hey, I'm seeing this trail camera, or hey, I saw this. How is all of this enforced?
It's an honor system. I'm just kidding. We have some of the most dedicated officers in the state that spend hours and hours and hours. And the truth is, we're not going to catch the first time. We're not going to catch everyone that does it. But eventually, we are going to get a good case. And there's a lot of things that play into this. But it seems like folks that like to break or bend the rules usually like to tell other people about it. And that helps us make a lot of these cases. Wyatt, this is really your question, so I answered it as best I could. What else would you add to that?
The slight changes to rules and regulations is not new for the enforcement side of things. The verbiage in which they're written is kind of where we live, but the fact that new things are being implemented is a yearly thing for us. So these new challenges aren't anything new.
Thank you.
While you're there, just because I want everybody to know, because I think a lot of the public doesn't know, how many law enforcement officers, dedicated law enforcement officers, does the division have statewide?
Typically, we have about 50. When we're full staffed, roughly 50 enforcement officers. That averages about 1,800 square miles per officer.
Yeah, 50 for the entire state.
When fully staffed, which I don't know the last time we were. So
yeah, I managed 2 major sheriff's offices in the state, and we had over 400.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions from the RAC before I turn it to the public? Any questions from public for Kobe? Come on up. Then please state your name and. That's right.
You doing? Good. My name's Ross Worthington. Sorry. Oh, over here.
Sorry. I'm sorry. You're good. Sorry.
Didn't realize I had a separate camera this time. Or anyways, so two questions. As far as with the seasons on the trail camera, I think one of the concerns is the enforcement on public versus private. How would they go about on the private? It's obviously extremely difficult, I'd assume, to if somebody's utilizing those cameras on private land to gain access to that. So just some concerns, one around that. And then a second question is, what specifically is the division's definition of trail cameras and differentiating between transmitting and non-transmitting? Because your presentation had some, just the way you defined it, and then what the regulation was that caused some concern.
Okay, so the first question, we'll divide this up in Wyatt. I think how we enforce wildlife law on private property is probably Wyatt's question.
So enforcement on private property does present some challenges as far as access and readily being able to just identify concerns on those properties. However, we do this every year, whether it's through information we've gained through informants or historical concerns we've had on various properties. Anytime we go on private property, we shouldn't say anytime, but a large majority of the time when we go on private property, we try to coordinate any of that access with the property owner. However, obviously for certain investigative reasons, there are times that we don't have that or provide that luxury when there's legal concerns associated with that. Open field doctrine allows us to, if we have reason to believe that people are hunting, fishing, trapping, or those activities are going on private property, we have the ability to go on that property to ensure that regulations are being enforced. However, we approach that very cautiously, understanding that we don't want to create concerns with private property owners and have a perception of us overstepping our bounds. So we are very careful with how we enforce laws on private property, but we do have the ability to enforce them on private property similar to public property.
Okay, thanks, Wyatt. Okay, so the definition of trail camera is at the first of the rule. And then in addition to that, this is what a person cannot do within the season dates. Place, maintain, or use a trail camera or non-handheld device to capture image or video that utilizes cellular, Wi-Fi, or satellite technology or comparable technology capable of providing real-time media from a device in the field to take, attempt to take, or aid in the attempt to take a big game animal between July 31st and January 31st. So there's a definition of trail camera in statute. With this definition, we did notice a small loophole with the definition in statute. Last time we proposed this, somebody brought this to our attention, I think accidentally on Facebook, saying, hey, if you use a live real-time camera, I'll store your media for you. And that would be a small loophole. And so we modified what they can or can't do with this language to not overstep the definition in code, but to seal up this loophole and tie it back to take. So it's, I believe it's pretty solid, but if there's something we've missed, we're always open and willing to modify or change.
Another question from the public.
Yeah, but I'll go fast because I think Casey got most of this for me.
We got to make sure we state your
Of
name
course,
first.
my name's Sierra Nelson. I'm with the Utah Wool Growers Association. Kobe, clarify for me one more time what the path forward is, because it's critically important as livestock producers that we can use transmitting cameras, not only for common agricultural practices like checking water or seeing if we have, sheep that are stuck down in the mud by the water or whatever, but also it's critically important for using it the best we can for depredating animals, because I want to use a scalpel, not a chainsaw, right? We want to make sure that we're getting the most precise thing we can. So moving forward, what's our path so that we can assure that a rule change or language change or whatever it is, I'm kind of dumb, to be able to use transmitted cameras for depredation for producers on public and private ground?
Well, first of all, Sierra, I don't think you're dumb. And second, we just asked the RAC when they make a motion on trail cameras, whatever that might be, to ask the division to add language that allows a producer to use a transmitting camera in the case of depredation on livestock.
Perfect.
And we would definitely work and get language that would be amenable and that would work for everybody.
All right. Any other questions from? All right. One more.
My name's Wyatt Selman. My question is why the January 31st? Is it, could most of the problems be resolved by going to November 31st, or what is the reason for that extension of the date?
No, it's, yeah, absolutely. The rationale behind the dates is because we wanted to cover all big game hunts. That's it. You're right. So the majority of the hunting takes place between August and the end of October into November, probably 15th. But there are still active hunts, bison hunts, cow hunts, other, there's a LaSalle Dolores Triangle buck hunts that go later. So there are hunts that go later into December and even January. That's the rationale.
Any other questions from the public? All right, at this time, I'll turn some time over to Ben, who's going to go over and give a summary of the public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were not as many comments submitted online as we were anticipating. We had 20 submissions total, 19 were residents and 1 was a non-resident. For this particular item, which best describes your position regarding the recommended changes to the big game rule? 6 of those respondents strongly agreed, 2 somewhat agreed, 0 neither agreed nor disagreed, 2 somewhat disagreed, 8 strongly disagreed. That particular item had a total of 18 votes. In reading through the comments, a lot of the comments really kind of reinforced their opinion on how they kind of check that that question, that answer, provide a little bit of a rationale or just emphasize their strength of their opinion. But a couple of things that were mentioned a few times were enforcement concerns, which you guys had quite a bit of discussion about tonight. The other was the exclusion of drones in our discussion or in our definition. That's something maybe we need to clarify for a couple of the members of the public.
If I could jump in there just for a second, I did actually look this up. I think drones are already banned under a different section, if I'm remembering correctly, under the aerial vehicle section.
Is that something you can address, Wyatt? Or I think we do have that defined and managed both in state code and in
Yeah,
our.
I believe it's already stated in big game rule. Let me steal Kobe's computer here. And it says R657-514, a person may not use an airplane, drone, or any other airborne vehicle or device or any motorized terrestrial or aquatic vehicle, including snowmobiles or other recreational vehicles. So it's to take protected wildlife. So it would be addressed already in code as far as using drones to take wildlife. Or excuse me, not code, but rule. And likely in code somewhere else as well.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Is that all? Okay, at this time, we're going to go to public comment period. If you're representing yourself, you'll be allowed 3 minutes for a comment. If you're representing a group, you will have 5 minutes to make your comment. So I'm going to begin. First on the list I have here is Sierra Nelson. She represents the wool growers, and so you have 5 minutes.
Oh my gosh. You guys are going to give me 5 minutes? We could do a lot in 5 minutes. I can talk really, really fast. I had a Mountain Dew before I came in.
30 seconds.
32 seconds? Come on. Okay, no, seriously though. The Utah Wool Growers Association would officially like to come forward and support the recommendations of the DWR on this, with the caveat that you guys will try to put forth some kind of exemption for transmitting cameras for livestock producers, because that's critically important to us. I have to say, I'm a little bit of a nerd, a lot of a nerd. Yeah, nerdy. I love to use game cameras and see wildlife out there and just, I mean, I geek out. I had 5 coyotes and 2 lions in one game camera picture at my parents' place. Like, I love that kind of stuff. So I don't want to see the cameras go away all the way, but I totally understand. And we realized that it wasn't the division's intent to harm livestock producers by trying to help big game. So we're good with it. We support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ross Worthington. I'll say your name for you since you didn't last time.
Ross Worthington, represent myself. Honestly, I think this is a direction that we need to go. I like the change specifically around the trail cameras with the transmitting. My only concern comes around a little bit of the definition. And then I also watched the Central last night that brought up some other questions around some of the infrared technology. I don't believe the division's intent is to get you. It was kind of brought up last night with some vagueness in the rule. I think there just needs to be, and they made the recommendation last night around infrared. I'd ask to do the same with trail cameras, but there's specific verbiage that's changed or added that specifically states that non-transmitting cameras are exempt. Just because you guys don't get to prosecute and don't determine how the law is interpreted, and that's a prosecutor or somebody else when it comes to that. And it goes with a lot of laws in this state. Comes from a book I read, 3 felonies a day. The average person commits 3 felonies a day based on laws changing and technologies changing. And I think over time as that happens, having that clear definition in there to make sure that it can't be interpreted by the person that's basically enforcing it at the end or that's prosecuting or bringing the charges against it. So I would ask simply that they add the verbiage specifically to exempt non-transmitting. And then they also mentioned last night in the Central with adding that for the infrared on trail cameras, specifically just because there are infrared trail cameras and they didn't want, again, that to be misused to prosecute somebody in those things. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Wyatt Selman.
I'm Wyatt Selman. I represent myself and our family sheep operation. I am in a huge support of the changes being made. I think hunting, the wildlife are getting less and less advantage and the hunters getting more and more with technology. So agree with it completely, except for, like Sierra said, and it's already been addressed. We need to be able to use these to be more effective in taking these problem animals, problem lions and bears out of our livestock. And if it needs to be worded that we can use it on both private and our public grazing allotments if possible. So thank you.
Okay, next up I have Kevin Norman.
Kevin Norman, representing myself tonight. I first want to thank the division for taking a stab at this. Although I think it's a little soft, I'm glad we're making a move in the right direction. You know, at some point, the more and more I get to work with the division, the more I see that they're the kicking post all the time. And as a hunter, at some point, we as hunters got to take a look in the mirror and ask what we can do for wildlife. Technology, in my opinion, has gone way too far. You know, there isn't a deer and an elk on the mountain anymore that doesn't have a name and 50,000 pictures of it. We've said it before, and you know, this is a step at putting the hunt back in hunting and the sport we love, which in turn can provide more opportunity for myself, my kids, and it's a challenge, I guess, to the sportsman to take a step back and quit being selfish that we are, and we tend to be, including myself. And, you know, we got to post the picture of the biggest buck or the biggest elk. We've got to take a step back and put the hunt back in hunting. And thank you to the division for taking a stab at this. Like I said, I'd like to see it be a little stiffer and go a step farther. But I am in support of this and anything beyond this. I think any more advancements in technology is a killer. We don't have room for it, and hopefully we can curb any further technology. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up, Tanner Carlson.
Tanner Carlson. I'm just representing myself tonight. I would like to thank the division as well for trying to save the wildlife here in Utah. Growing up as a kid, I would get on a horse at 2, 3 in the morning and ride up the mountain and get excited to look through the binos and see what we can find. And nowadays, a lot of guys already know what's on the mountain. I think that we're kind of being too soft with this issue. I don't think there should be cameras on public land. I would love to see, I mean, it's definitely a good starting place for the division, but I would love to see all cameras not allowed. I think that would help our wildlife. It would help hunters. I know guys down in southern Utah, as soon as they find a deer on a camera, they start gridding it with 75 to 80 cameras, and that deer has no fighting chance. And so, yes, it's a good idea to start putting these restrictions, but I think we just need to get to the end result and get rid of them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tanner. Next up, Steve Sorensen.
Steve Sorensen, I'm representing myself. I want to say what Kevin Norman said too about the division taking a stab at this. Appreciate you guys. I'd like to see more of a Nevada style season. I think law enforcement would thank me for that too in the future, just from the comments that have come up tonight. I run a few cameras myself, but I don't think the deer have a fighting chance anymore. I've heard one kid tell me personally that he had 40 cameras on one deer to pattern it in a 500-yard area. I think we need to rein in some of this technology in hunting. I'd like to also make sure that the ag community be exempt in transmitting and regular cameras on private and public lands. Thank you, guys.
All right. Our last comment card would be Troy Justinson.
Troy Justinson, Sportsman, Fish and Wildlife. Man, this don't hurt near as bad as House Bill 295, does it? My nose is not bleeding. I can actually sit down. So, but, anyway, before I start with my comments, I'd just like to acknowledge something about what Ben talked about with this cinnamon cricket. That a lot of partners come together to get something done great, but there's really two that were the driving force behind this. Mike Lauder, he's the one that really come forth and brought it to everybody's attention and rallied the troops. We thought it was dead in the water. There's no way. And then rides in Representative Snyder. Those two, it doesn't happen without those guys. So thank you. But on behalf of Sportsman, Fish and Wildlife, we would actually support the wool growers' suggestion with that, is supporting the division's recommendation with the caveat that we still allow those cameras for our producers on public and private lands on their allotments to handle predators. So it's important. I'm a little long in the tooth. I've been at this for close to 30 some odd years, and in the current position I hold and with the time that I had left, if anybody's to say, hey, what was the one thing that if you could accomplish one thing, what would it be? And I thought a lot about that, and what it would be is to increase opportunity while maintaining quality. And unless we as sportsmen are willing to show a little self-constraint and limit technology, it is not possible. We have rifles that shoot 1,500 yards. We have bows that, 150 yards. Muzzleloaders are now an 800-yard gun. We have trail cameras that are 365, 24/7, can send a picture to you at any time. We got to put hunt back in hunting. This isn't trying to point the finger at anybody, trying to say ethics or whatever. Bottom line is we've got to show a little restraint if we want any resemblance of quality. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. All right. I appreciate all those who participated that came up and shared their comments. At this time, we will allow hear comments from RAC members and discussion on any possible motions. I want to, if it's all right, I'm going to take a minute for a comment. I think that what a lot of people don't recognize is what was mentioned by some of our commenters about the number of cameras that are out there. It's hard. I think a lot of people I think there's a lot of guys that go out and put 1 or 2 cameras out that would love to go out and see them with their son. And I think it's a great thing. They like to take their family out and do that. But I think what a lot of people don't recognize is what was mentioned before, that once a large animal, a trophy class animal is located, the amount of pressure that gets put on it. I mean, when they talked about gridding, they're literally putting cameras in areas they're going to track every second, every move of that deer. And it's just, I feel like it's really taking away. It's not good for our resource. It's not good for the hunting industry or anything. And so that's the reason for regulation. It's not trying to take anyone's freedoms away, but we are trying to save a resource. And I hope that we'll think about that a little bit as we're talking about motions and as we address this as a RAC. I think I'll hear from Brad, and then I'll allow Paul Chase after Brad.
I just want to echo a few things. First of all, I do appreciate the fact that division's willing to bring this forward. We've seen a lot of discussion back and forth with technological advances, and hear a lot of this discussion about, well, if we start to regulate technology now, where does it end? Do we end up back in a loincloth with a spear? And it's a slippery slope. Well, the flip side of that right now is we're on a slippery slope of unregulated technology. You can, to take it to the very extreme, you can log in on the internet. There are computer-controlled rifles on private ranches in Texas, and you can fire those with the click of your mouse and shoot animals. And so it is a slippery slope. We do have to show some restraint somewhere along the way here. And having these discussions with technological advances, man, they are not simple issues. There are so many complexities that go into all of this that I think us as sportsmen, as RAC members, need to be willing to have these discussions, because let's face it, we've gotten very effective at taking animals. And I know a lot of the discussion, and Kobe mentioned it as well, and biologically, there may not be an effect. Anecdotally, I think you look at it, the effect on mature animals, when we talk about quality, having a semblance of quality, trail cameras have affected that. Biologically, no. The oldest age class animals, absolutely. They're known, they're hunted, they're focused on all the time. And so I think we got to be willing to have these conversations. They'll be difficult. They're complex issues along the way, but I think we need to have the lead on this. I appreciate the division bringing it up and giving this opportunity. So,
okay, Paul, and then we'll go to Matt Clark after Paul.
Just going to echo a lot of that. The Forest Service certainly appreciates the division bringing this topic up, and certainly supports what they're proposing right now. We also want to make sure hunters are aware that trail cameras can be damaged in our vegetation and prescribed fuel treatments. We do post those areas, but with the new cameras and lithium batteries and all that, we're seeing a lot of cameras that are left out year round and may not be getting checked. So every year we know that we're burning cameras up. So people have questions, always come in, talk to us in the office, and we can tell you where we're planning these veg treatment projects. Thanks.
We'll go to Matt.
Thanks, Justin. I totally support the proposal that the division has, with the exception of an allowance for producers for depredating animals. I would even be happy going one step further and having a Nevada style law where there are no trail cameras operating in a specific season for exactly the reasons that have been described.
All right, thanks, Matt. Now allow Randy.
Yeah, I'm just going to chime in. I try not to be repetitive, but technology has been a big concern for me for a long time. I was muzzleloading hunting. That was a 100-yard max. I mean, that's just what it was. But then we don't have primitive weapons anymore. So technology overall, we just, in my opinion, we have to be very careful with it. We have to watch what we're doing. I'm a huge fan of the Nevada style. To see how things go. I mean, and it should be pointed out. I mean, Arizona just wiped out all cameras. You can't put them out. So a lot of states are addressing it, and this is our first shot at addressing it as far as trail cameras go. So, thank you.
Kevin.
I hunt a lot, get around a lot, ride horses a lot. And when I'm up in the forest on public property, should I have some expectation of privacy? Legally, it would probably say, no, I don't have any legal right to privacy. But if you own a camera that I'm flipping you the bird on, I apologize, maybe. So I am so happy that this has come up, that the division is willing to take this step, even though I think it's that first step. I too like that Nevada style where it just says no cameras.
First season.
Pardon?
Nevada's first season.
Or season, yeah. And so again, I just really think that we're taking the first step here. I think it does need to continue and become stronger and be more restrictive on these technologies and get back to just exactly what Troy said, put the hunt back into hunting. Those animals deserve that respect, and we've taken that respect from them.
I think Casey.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I think the sentiment I share with the comments that have been made. I want everyone to recognize that I bear full responsibility for this protracted debate tonight. Troy mentioned it, but HB 295 was an attempt to solve this in Salt Lake. And I think any of us that are involved in this sport know how contentious that was. And so the decision was made to push it down to the RAC level, and this is what we're doing. So the division is following the law and having this discussion, which I think is much needed. I want to commend the division specifically on this in light of having had that discussion in a more heated way. We tried twice to get this right with data. And the division sent multiple surveys. We've had multiple discussions. And when we felt like we've needed to come back to the drawing board, they have. When we feel like we need to be fluid, they've been amenable. So I think, I just think the division, if things go sideways and people are mad, I'll take the blame. I already have. But I think the division needs to be commended publicly for engaging in this very contentious issue. So thank you.
Okay, I believe Jamie has a comment.
So I'm again a newbie. HB 298, that's been referred to twice, and I don't know what that is. Can you help me?
Go ahead, Casey.
My therapist said I'm not allowed to speak about it anymore. No, so HB 295 was a bill that ran last legislative session, which looked at doing three things. It regulated baiting, looked at regulating trail cams, and then made some definitions within waterfowl management areas. A compromise was made in the legislative process. Initially, there was a mandate how trail cameras were going to be regulated per state statute, and the compromise was that it would go through the RAC, and that the RAC would make a decision with the assistance of the division on trail cameras specifically. So this meeting and these surveys and all of those things are fulfilling that statutory requirement.
And baiting also, that we'll talk about later, right? With like bears?
No, it's a different, the baiting was resolved in statute. Trail cameras was pushed to the RAC. Okay. It specifically regulated the baiting of big game and was silent on the baiting of bears.
Okay, thank you so much for your help. I guess I would just like to make a comment and say, I'm not a hunter. I don't think that cameras lead to a fair hunt. It doesn't seem like they, and I know this because I do research on these animals and I see them in my computer, and I totally like agree how amazing it is to see these animals. And I would like to see it not allowed on, especially public land. Private land, I think, is a little bit different. Yeah.
All right, Brad, do you have another comment?
Sorry, not to go backwards. Can I ask one question of the division?
Sure.
Wyatt, what's the penalties included in this? So say the proposal goes through with the season starting, what's the penalty? Is it a wildlife violation? Is it misdemeanor? What is it?
Specific to trail cameras and use
Yes.
of trail cameras. So we largely gauge our enforcement based on the intent of the individual. That could go anywhere from a rule violation, which is an infraction, all the way up to, depending on what the animal is killed, a third-degree felony for wanton destruction. For basically fall under an unlawful method of taking big game.
I wonder if it might be appropriate, and I don't know that I'm the person to do this, but to help members of the RAC maybe have an understanding of, would there be someone that would be willing to give a quick rundown of the Nevada season and what their law does that might help some of our members of our RAC that may not be familiar with it? Is there anyone that would take us?
I can do the summary from the DWR survey, which covers it, I think, pretty well, just because of what.
Oh, your mic.
Apologize, me and Covey are socializing. What was the question?
Would you be willing to give us, I know you don't work for Nevada, you're not there, but the best definition or the best summary of that Nevada
Yeah.
trail camera law?
I've got it here pulled up. I'll just read it directly from that presentation here. So Nevada's regulation says, Nevada trail camera regulations state that all trail cameras are not to be used on public land or private land without permission from the landowner. From August 1st to December 31st for really any camera, but if it's a transmitting trail camera, that season is longer from July 1st to December 31st. So a quick summary is basically cameras are banned. If you get permission from the landowner, you can use them. You can only use them during certain dates. That date is longer for transmitting trail cameras.
Say that last part again.
The season date in which you could use it is
in Europe
more restricted for transmitting trail cameras.
Okay.
Apologize for the misquoting that there.
Okay. All right.
If there's no other comments, I'd like to take a stab at it.
Yeah, so we've been discussing what I would like to see if we could specifically to trail cameras and then go to other parts of the presentation, maybe as a whole. So go ahead.
So try to written down so I can try to be specific. A person shall not place, maintain, or use any trail camera or non-held device to take or aid in the taking of big game between July 31st and January 31st.
That is a motion.
That's my motion.
This is Matt Clark speaking. I would second that motion if Randy is willing to add an exemption for producers with depredating animals.
Yeah, my thought was, Matt, to address this specific hunting and then add a second motion to address the growers or the ag. Would the ag folks, would you be comfortable with that, Earl and Junior?
Casey's got a motion.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and so that was my thought, Matt. I appreciate you bringing that up. I should have said that.
All right. So we have a motion on the table. I should just grab your phone and read it right off there. The motion is that a person shall not place, use or maintain any trail camera on or non-held device to take or aid in the take of big game between July 31st and January 31st. That was the motion. We have a second by Matt Clark. Any discussion on that motion?
Now, I will add, because I didn't want to make the motion ugly, but we need to add the growers' concern and the definition of trail cameras will have to be updated.
So we'll do this in a separate motion. That we can do this as one motion. We'll get it. Okay.
I want to,
Casey.
if I can, I just want to speak in full support of this. For those of you that have just sort of been listening, this is by default, more or less, the Nevada rule. And I think it makes it much more enforceable. I think the other part of this that I think folks should be aware of is if you look at the data that's already been, the survey data that's been alluded to earlier, this is consistent with public preferences. We're not going outside of what people are requesting. I think this is supported in the survey that the division has put forth. So I think it's a good motion and I fully support it.
All right. There's no more discussion. I'll call for a vote.
Well, can I?
Can I? Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, can I just ask a question? So most of the big game hunts remind me of the seasons. Thank you for helping me understand all of this. It's like November through January.
Colby's going to answer that.
So August 1st to January 31st, Randy's dates covered all big game seasons, all the dates must be.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Thank you.
Yep.
And I just had a quick question. If I recall correctly, the original proposal from the division spoke directly about transmitting cameras and not cameras that just store photos. So the motion by Randy, is that related specifically to transmitting trail cameras or all trail cameras?
All. That's why I said we'll need to do a separate amendment. I just wanted to keep this simple and clean. So by my logic, I would add a second amendment after this that includes all trail cameras, not just transmitting.
Not an amendment, but a separate. Not so much an amendment, but a separate motion. Okay. All right. So I'm going to call for a vote of the motion that is on the table at this time if there's no more discussion. We'll begin with David Earl.
In favor?
Brad Buchanan.
Yes.
Randy Hutchinson.
Yes.
Kevin McLeod.
Yes.
Mike Lauder.
Yes.
Junior Goring.
Yes.
Casey Snyder.
Yes.
Matt Clark.
Yes.
Nikki Wayment.
Yes.
Darren Perry.
Yes.
Jamie Butler.
Yes.
Paul Chase.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously. All right.
So motion to amend, is that in order?
Yes.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make an additional motion. This is to address the concerns of producers. I'm wondering if it would be germane to have this motion apply not only in the big game section, but in the cougar section as well. That would be at your discretion, but it would be modifying the definition in both places.
Probably both big game, cougar, and bear.
Oh, okay. So in all three, that is my motion if it's germane. So after the words, this would be section CI. It says or CII, monitoring. So after monitoring, I would add the words taking nuisance animals, comma, or in cases of depredation. And then it would say on active ag operations. And I would add the words on public, and then it says or private. So the amendment in full would say a private landowner could use it for monitoring, taking nuisance animals, or in cases of depredation on active ag operations on public or private lands.
Right.
I would second. This is Matt Clark.
We have it. So a motion from Casey and a second from Matt Clark. Oh boy, I'm waiting for this. I'm going to repeat the motion here. 1 second.
Add that after what word was it, Casey?
Monitoring.
Okay, thanks.
So the motion in section CII of the division's proposal, add the word after monitoring, take nuisance animals, or in cases of depredation, active on private or public agricultural lands. That was
On active ag operations on public or private lands, yeah.
okay. Can I have a second from Matt? Any discussion on that?
Yeah, one question, is there any wording there that specifies that that is for a, not just anyone, it's for a wool grower or someone, a person in that business?
So if I can, Mr. Chair, so my intention was that is in the private property owner section. So it would, so there's exemptions. I'm trying to pull it up. So the exception above says the prohibition on use of trail cameras does not apply to. If we need to narrow that down to the producer himself, but I'm sticking it in the exemptions section, which also includes private landowners monitoring or protecting their property, municipalities participating in urban deer programs, those sorts of things.
So in the existing.
Exemption. So if we needed to, I would be amenable to adding operators or employees. If that would.
Operator or agent, yeah.
Yeah. I would be, that would be.
Would you like, can we add that?
Can I restate my motion?
Please.
Okay, you tell me what it needs to be restated as, Ben.
I just got the first one dialed.
Dude, I even wrote it down this time. So I would probably include that on active ag operations by operators or their agents. Is that what you said? God, that is, I'm not even an attorney and there's a lot of words in there.
Sounds like a politician.
Hey,
I wasn't going to say it.
That's worse. That's worse.
Okay. So in section CII, add the words after monitoring in the division's recommended language to read. Monitoring, taking nuisance animals, or in cases of depredation on active agricultural operations by operators or their agents on private or public lands.
Yeah. So that was an amendment to the original motion. Matt, do you have any any concerns with your second, with that amendment?
I still second.
Okay. Any questions? Are I good to call for a vote? Begin with David Earl.
Yes.
Brad Buchanan.
Yes.
Randy Hutchinson.
Yes.
Kevin McLeod.
Yes.
Mike Lauder.
Yes.
Junior Goring.
Yes.
Casey Snyder.
Yes.
Matt Clark.
Yes.
Nikki Wayment.
Yes.
Darren Perry.
Yes.
Jamie Butler.
Yes.
And Paul Chase.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Okay, we still have the remainder of if there's any other discussion about any other parts of the presentation.
Yeah, actually need to
proposal.
clarify something with Covey, if I could. So blowing up your guys' recommendation, I apologize. But in that first paragraph, the division specifically lists trail transmitting devices. Do we need to make a motion so that the original motion would include transmitting and non-transmitting? Do we need to change the definition with a motion?
If we accept
So we can't change the definition of trail camera, but what you could ask the division to do, instead of getting into language, just ask us to make sure that we include all types of cameras that could be placed, like to watch or view wildlife remotely, something like that. And then we can work on the language.
Yeah, because I don't want to, this isn't the place for splitting hairs.
And yes, and at the end of the day, if there's something that we missed, I think I understood the intent of the RAC. Let me just make sure. The intent of the RAC was to say, we want a season on trail cameras as it relates to take, whether that be storage camera or transmitting cameras. We want a season.
Okay.
Did I capture the intent correctly? Okay, perfect.
And
We can work with that.
just to add to that, I think you did cover it in your first motion by saying any trail camera or non-held
Yep.
device. And that's a sentiment that the chair can express to the board as well.
Perfect.
And with that, I'd make the motion to accept the rest of the proposals as presented by the division.
Okay.
Matt
Matt had a-
again, if I could. So there were two issues that received a fair amount of feedback that I don't think that we've adequately addressed yet. The first issue.
Can I address something just because of the issue of this? Is it all right if I won't recognize the motion quite yet because I missed his comments before. So go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so there were two issues that we got feedback on that I don't know that we've necessarily addressed adequately yet. The first issue is the hunter orange during these overlapping seasons. And the second issue was the ability to apply for both a male and female once-in-a-lifetime tags, specifically for bison and sheep. And we did get quite a bit of feedback on those, so I'd like to discuss those a little bit.
Go ahead with any of your, I guess, what would be your concerns, or if you have on it then?
So my
Is there anything
concern
else?
specifically with the allowing hunters to apply for both the male once in a lifetime and the female once in a lifetime hunts. I realize these are pretty small hunts. There's a concern in some of the emails that I received that even though the odds are astronomically low, there is the potential for somebody to potentially draw both a male and a female moose tag in the same year. That probably will never happen realistically. But I did receive a couple of suggestions of allowing the people that would happen to draw the male tag, that result comes out first, still be able to purchase a bonus point, but not necessarily draw a female tag in the same year for the same species.
Please.
Can I speak to this a little bit? I know the motion that came out of the central region, and as we thought about this and we discussed it today and last night, the problem is that goes exactly the opposite way of what we're trying to do. Now, I understand that there are problems with point creep, and I understand that forcing choice ultimately and increasing populations are going to be the way that we deal with that. I also understand that we made a commitment to change the draw to allow for proposed permit numbers for big game hunters. They've been asking for this for years, proposed permit numbers before they apply and during the application. And in order to do that, there are certain things that had to line up to free up time. Everything takes a check. So if you have a rule that says that you can apply for cow moose and bull moose, but if you draw a bull moose, then you no longer can apply for cow moose, which is what it is now, because you can apply for both. If you draw one, then you're precluded from the next draw. That check takes time for us, for our contractor. And I'm not saying it's that one thing is the straw that broke the camel's back and won't allow this to work. I'm saying that they all add up. And in order to keep our commitment, we brought this rule change forward. So this is a check that we don't feel like we need because we're already allowing people to apply for both. They just right now can't hunt both if they draw a male permit. And getting rid of that requirement for moose, bighorn, and pronghorn is one of the things that helps us streamline the draw process. That's why we brought it forward. So if the RAC's not okay with that, modifications of that, like happened in Central Region, and I wish I would have spoke better to this last night, just end up causing probably more problems, more difficulty. It would be better probably just to leave it the way that it is. I would ask them to allow it on pronghorn because we end up in situations with pronghorn. Pronghorn are just because of where they are in the landscape. Sometimes we need the same individual to be able to harvest a buck and a doe. And right now they can't. I understand they're a scarce resource, more scarce than elk or deer, but they're also distributed differently on the landscape and have the potential to impact private land differently. So, and have accessibility differences. So that's that one. And the hunter orange one I've already commented on, so I don't feel like we need to comment on that again.
Thank you, Kobe. I don't really have an opinion on this. I just think we need to do
specifically talk about it.
Any other comments, or I'd entertain a motion now at this time.
And Matt, I hope that wasn't, I was just trying to provide the rationale. I actually appreciate you bringing it back up so I could clarify. So, thank you.
Yeah, we're going to go. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to accept the remainder of the division's proposals as stated.
All right, we have a motion to accept as presented. Looks like, Mike looks like he might be willing to, no?
Oh, sorry.
I'll second it.
I didn't mean to force you, just going to your mind.
I was just getting it closer.
Sorry. So I have a motion to accept the remainder as presented by Randy Hutchinson and a second by Mike Lauder. Any discussion before I call for a vote? We'll begin on the, to my right, we'll begin with David Earl,
Yes.
Brad Buchanan,
Yes.
Randy Hutchinson,
Yes.
Kevin McLeod,
Yes.
Mike Lauder,
Yes.
Junior Goring, Casey Snyder,
Yes.
Matt Clark,
Yes.
Nikki Wayment,
Yes.
Darren Perry,
Yes.
Jamie Butler,
Yes.
and Paul Chase.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. How do we feel about going to our next item? Does anyone need a break? Are we good to go? We want to move on? All right. We'll go ahead now and go to our 7th item on the agenda. That is the fur bear season dates and bobcat permit recommendations. Darren DeBlois is here as our mammals coordinator. He's here for any questions that we might have at this time. I'll begin with questions from the RAC and then turn some time to the public for questions.
Just a quick question. I don't think there's any substantial change from when we did this, what was it, 3 months ago, 4 months
Right,
ago?
yeah. So this is just recommending season dates for next year, but we're keeping things the same.
All right. We ready to turn some time to the public if they have any questions from the public for Darren concerning the fur bear season dates and bobcat recommendations? All right. I'll turn some time over to Ben, who can share with us from the survey, how the
We had 20 submissions total for this round of surveys. For this item, we only had 3 respondents, 2 strongly agreed and 1 somewhat agreed. That's all we've got.
All right. We'll go to comment period. We'll go with the public first. I'll ask for Cody Bassett to come forward.
All right, I'm standing in for Cody Bassett. I'm Walter Zarek. And I'm representing the Trappers Association, and we're in favor of the recommendations.
Okay. Sarah, I have a question. It says 6-8. Is that 6 through 8? Do you have where's she at?
Listen, I
Sierra.
have the handwriting of an 8th grade boy. I need 6 and 8.
All right, guys, just making sure.
But
No.
I mean, since we're doing it, like, I support the division.
Okay. I asked for it. Okay. If we don't have any more comments from the public, we'll now turn time over for the RAC. Any comments or discussion before a motion is made? Checking my screen, I don't see any.
I sent one up, I thought.
Yours says Lions.
Okay.
Come up, Steve. If you want to make a comment, come up. Am I being that bad?
Come up and see.
Might need security out to my truck after.
All of us 8th grade boys, we got to settle down.
Matt,
Thanks. I'm just wondering if Darren could clarify for me the timetable of the data collection on the Bobcats. I mean, we've kind of kicked this can down the road because we didn't think we had some data. When are we expecting that data to happen?
Right. So what we did is consolidate the bear and cougar recommendations so we could have an annual cycle. And it made the most sense just to include our fur bearer recommendations at the same time, just handle all of these recommendations. And so this time's a little weird. We just barely did this. There isn't any new data. And so we're recommending what we recommend in the summer. Moving forward, we'll have each year new data, and it'll be data from the previous season. But the new season will have just started. So I think we'll be good. But this time around, there really wasn't any need to change anything other than the dates. Does that answer your question, Matt?
It does. Thank you.
okay. I'd entertain a motion at this time.
I'll make the motion. Make the motion, we accept the proposal as presented, accepting the season dates.
Okay.
I'll second.
So I have a motion by Mike Lauder to accept the presentation as presented, and a second by Brad Buchanan. Any discussion before I call for a vote? All right, I'll start on the right. We'll go with David Earl,
Yes.
Brad Buchanan,
Yes.
Randy Hutchinson,
Yes.
Kevin McLeod,
Yes.
Mike Lauder,
Yes.
Junior Goring,
Yes.
Casey Snyder.
Yes.
Matt Clark,
Yes.
Nikki Wayment,
Yes.
Darren Perry,
Yes.
Jamie Butler,
Yes.
and Paul Chase.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll now go to our 8th topic on the agenda, the Cougar recommendations and Rule R657-10 revisions for the 2022 and 2023 season. We also have Darren still up here, our mammals coordinator. We'll begin with any questions from members of the RAC that you might have for Darren concerning this agenda topic. None.
Okay, I'll go.
Jamie.
I'll go. So the way I understood it is that there might be a loophole if people could get a bear permit and not fill their bear permit and still allow a chase with that, with the cougar permit. Can you speak to that? Is that how much does a bear permit cost? Is that a loophole that people will take advantage of? Does that matter?
Just to make sure I know what you're referring to, Jamie, there's a couple things. Are we referring to the camera loophole or the season overlap?
No, the season overlap and yeah.
Yeah. So what we're recommending here is on particular units, the South Slope and the Wasatch Avinaquin units, that we eliminate. There's a bait only season for bear on those units. And we're recommending that we eliminate the use of dogs for cougar hunting at the same time on those units, just because we have baits in the field and we don't want hounds in this field at the same time. So that's, as far as the cougar recommendation goes, that's the rationale for the season adjustment. Does that answer your question, Jamie? Is that what you're referring to?
The way that I saw it, it was on the same units that there was an overlap in the bear and the cougar hunting, and that there was a chase allowed for cougars but not bears, or vice versa. And I wondered if there was a loophole that you could get both permits and kind of skip that regulation. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
the concern, you're exactly right. The concern is that someone could be out conceivably chasing bears and claiming to only be chasing lions, and that makes it difficult for our enforcement folks to, unless
Yeah.
they get something up a tree. So that's the
Exactly.
reason. Yeah.
Exactly. What, and how does the division feel about that? Is that matter?
We tried to avoid that through the cougar recommendations for those South Slope, Bonanza, Vernal, the Wasatch Mountains of Vennequin, where we have a no dog restriction between May 28th and June 30th. And that's actually during the bait season on those units. And we're trying to keep dogs out of the field altogether during the bear bait season. You might be thinking of some of the bear stuff, which will be coming up next. And we do have some concerns about overlap between bait and bear, or bait hunting and hound hunting on those as well. But that'll be the next agenda item.
Okay, I'll wait. Well, I'll wait to hear more until
Okay.
the next agenda item.
I hope I addressed what you're asking.
Thank you.
Any other RAC members with questions? All right, is there any questions from the public you might have for Darren at this time? Okay, I'll turn some time over now to Ben to go over the survey or the public feedback from the proposals.
Kind of similar to the last item. Of the 20 respondents, we had 3 that voted on this item, which best describes your position regarding the 2022-23 cougar recommendations. 1 strongly agreed, 1 neither agreed nor disagreed, and 1 strongly disagreed. There was a comment, I think it was left in the next item for the black bear recommendations, but applies here, that any unlimited quota for lions or bears is irresponsible management. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we'll go to comments from the public. Sierra Nelson from the Wool Growers.
Wait, what are we talking about? I took a nap there for a minute.
Yeah.
So you guys always know that I'm railing on you because I want to be able to take more cougars, because the depredation is just insane. And we see it not only in our livestock, but we see it mirrored in our wildlife as well. But one of the things that really stresses me out is that in our last meeting about lions, I mean, I feel like we just barely did this. They had limited the take of collared cats, and I understand the reasons for that. But at the same time, if that collared cat is depredating, it needs to go. So my hope is that you guys will reevaluate that and go from there.
Yeah, collared cats are not included in depredating.
But at the same time, like, okay, so I realize that, but if a sportsman can eliminate it for us instead of just doing it off a depredation tag that we have on our own, like, we like to be able to work as a partnership with that. So if there's a way that we could include that, that would be huge for us. So other than that, we'd like to support the division's recommendations, and we thank you for all you do.
Steve Sorensen, there's a big number 8 and it says right on here, lions. It's even circled.
I'm glad Sierra took the bullet on this one, because I didn't know if this was the time to bring this up or not. The Wildlife Board made it illegal to kill collared cats. And I understand that where the study's going on down in central Utah. That affects our northern Utah lions that are collared. And the study's not going on anymore. There's cats walking around with a collar that doesn't work, that my 12-year-old daughter won't be able to shoot here come January 1st if she chooses to, just because it has a collar on it. We're getting hammered. Our Ogden unit, our cash unit, they're in predator management. Cache is one of the smallest lion units in the state. And for the last 5 years, Darren, we've killed more cats in that little teeny tiny unit than any other unit in the state of Utah. Maybe Darren could tell you how many collared cats are left up there. They're not being studied anymore. I don't think this would affect if you guys took it to the wildlife board and asked them to address it. It wouldn't affect the study BYU's doing down south in central Utah. But am I over my time?
Not yet.
Let me go over my notes real quick. I think I covered it, guys.
I think we forgot to do the time, so.
I'll keep going.
Oh, it is on there. No, you're good. I just couldn't see it in the screen at that time. Sorry.
He said, no, we're good.
Okay. Our next comment, Corey Huntsman.
Corey Huntsman, I'm representing the Utah Houndsman Association, and we support the division's line recommendations.
Thank you. I believe that's all the comments that I have on this agenda item from the public. Okay, we'll go now. Paul, is that a question or do you have a comment? We're now opening time for the comments from the RAC. Paul.
Just clarification on Steve's. I believe the study's still ongoing. I just opened the gate to allow Kristen in there for going to a cluster that she's studying with this cougar project.
Yeah, they'll be wrapping up this month, Paul. So yeah, they started in December 3 years ago, so they're just ending their data collection phase.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, any other? Looks like Matt has a comment, maybe a question.
Thanks. Yeah, Matt Clark here. So actually, let me turn my video back on. So I guess I generally support what's been presented here. I have more of a philosophical issue with cougar management in general. We don't really get to decide what's happening here. And I'm concerned that the legislature is running this through the RACs just basically to give themselves cover, make it look like we're behind everything that's going on with the predator management thing, but we don't really have any decision-making power. So although I'm willing to support the current recommendation that's on the table right now, my longer-term concern is that this is getting run through the RACs, but we don't actually have decision-making authority on this anymore. And I'm concerned that we're being used for cover for other people's decisions.
Darren, would you take a second to address that?
Certainly. I think the way that, with regards to predator management, the state statute and the legislature is really where our state government makes decisions for us. We've sent representatives there, and that's perfectly obviously within their authority to make those changes. So, but the way it works for the RACs are if our biologists determine that a unit needs to be under a predator management plan in order to address concerns with mule deer numbers, then that's a director action as per legislation and as per our policy. So we follow our policy when we do that. What we're bringing to the RACs, and I understand Matt's point, but when we come to the RACs and make recommendations, it would be on units that are not under current predator management. And so that's effectively how the RACs enter into the process. Now, as far as predator management plans go, the intent is to address a problem over a short period of time. In order to have an effect, we need to be aggressive, and we need to do it in a short period of time and make sure we reduce densities. And so that's the tool we use when we have those concerns. And so hopefully that's clarifying. I think Matt's comments probably just stand on their own. I think I know where he's coming from too, but anyway, yeah.
All right, I'll begin with Randy and then we'll go to Brad.
Oh, I'm just going to echo Matt. We've had this conversation. I just wasn't going to belabor it. We've talked about it for a couple of years. The vast majority of the state is under predator management via statute. So it takes those areas out of our control.
Brad.
I guess just for clarification, Darren, so by default, when a study in an area is over, I guess going back to what the Wildlife Board decided, it doesn't automatically open up to the taking of colored lions, is that correct?
Well, what the Wildlife Board decided was that for the next 3-year window, when we made these recommendations for Cougars 4, that statewide, no collared cat could be taken, with the exception of depredation situations. And so that's where we are right now. And it does, it certainly is something we consider when we look at studies and where we might want to collar animals. But that's where we are.
Thank you.
Do you have an idea of a number, as was mentioned in the comment?
Yeah, I'd have to look specifically, and I can get Steve on that, but I think it's less than 5 on the cache. But we also have collared lions on the Manti outside of the Central Region study that's just kicking off, and on the Book Cliffs as well. So there are probably 15 or so outside of the Central Region that have collars that are active, and there may be a few still wearing collars that don't work. So.
Okay, thank you. Junior.
I don't see any logic in protecting the animals that are out of the studies now. Of course, I don't see any logic in protecting any of them, but I think especially in our area where these animals could well be a depredating force against us, that we should allow taking these collared animals that are no longer in the studies. I don't know if that requires an amendment or a motion, or what's the proper?
When we come time, I think when it comes time to make a motion, if that's something that you wanted to bring up, you can do so. We still have Jamie, you have a comment.
I have actually a question. The studies that you're referring to, what are they for? What is the purpose of the studies?
Did you get that? It cut out, but I think we figured out what you're asking.
Jamie, I picked up, you want to understand what the study's purposes are?
Yeah, thank you, because I wasn't here.
No, it's fine. We're talking about 2 studies right now for mountain lions. USU is just wrapping up a data collection phase of a cougar study on 3 units in the state, and that study's focusing on prey selection, kitten survival, and female survival, and they want to look at developing a population model for us for cougars. The other study is just starting in the Central Region, and the primary focus of that is scavenging behavior in cougars. So we are collaring cougars in that area, and we will be putting carcasses out and recording how often cougars engage in scavenging behavior. And that's to try to answer a question. There's a little bit of a discrepancy between our mule deer when we're looking at mule deer that are killed by cougars from the mule deer's perspective, and the USU study looking at how often collared lions seem to scavenge. But I feel like looking at the actual behavior using a controlled study is the way to get the best answer there. So for cougars, that's it in the state at the moment.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Nikki.
Sorry, I'm in the same boat as Jamie, and we're sort of newbies to the group. I'm curious if there's been a discussion previously about how, and this might apply to the next agenda item more than this one, but what's the process for determining the actual populations of mountain lions in the state? And do you feel confident in that number?
We don't, in the cougar management plan, we don't identify a population estimate as a parameter. So we don't use that as a direct management data point. And the reason is because cougars are hard to count. You know, they're nocturnal largely and cryptic, and they just don't stand around and let you drive down the road and count them. And so we use indices to try to get a feel for population trends. And what we're using now are the percent of females in the harvest. And we also look at the percent of adults. And the theory there is, depending on what your management goals are, if females in the harvest is low, you'd expect to see a growing population. As it gets higher, you'd expect to see that population decline. And adults is a proxy for what kind of age structure you have. And as you see younger and younger animals showing up in the harvest, people will typically select for older animals, usually older males first, and then perhaps older females next. And as you start to see those ages come down, that would indicate a population that's you've removed the older age classes, and now you're looking at a reduced population. So that's what we use currently. We do run a harvest-based population reconstruction, which kind of builds the population going backwards from a point in time. And just because the nature of our harvest data, that's always an estimate that's a couple years old. And that estimate runs adult animals in the 2,300 range in the state. That doesn't include yearlings and cubs. And that number doesn't take into account natural mortality. So that's like a minimum estimate of adult mountain lions in the state. And again, it's not reliable enough that we use it as a management marker, but it's very interesting from a trend perspective. And that data shows that we've seen increasing cougar numbers over the last decade, and probably have as many cougars in the state now as we ever have, at least certainly since the late 90s, early 2000s. Cougar population.
Thank you very much. I study owls, so I ought to know all about the difficulty of trying to find cryptic nocturnal creatures.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, do we have any other comments?
Darren, how are hunters notified? Well, with the studies that were going on in the state, granted with what wildlife board passed, there's just no taking. But if that was to be amended, would hunters have to have notification when there's a study taking place in the unit?
Yeah, it needs something put in the guidebook. The way the rule's written is that if we feel the need, and it depends on the study goals, we can recommend a prohibition on take. And the initial recommendation, and this is just, we just did this in summer, but the Huntsman, if you recall, had a proposal to protect colored lions on those central region units. And the board felt like they wanted to do it statewide, so that's what we decided.
Any other comments? Any discussion on possible motions?
Sorry, can I ask one more question?
Yes.
Thanks so much. So I just want to make sure I understood what Darren just said, which was there are currently 2 studies in the state with about 15 collared cats. Is that the correct number that you gave?
Well, those would be the ones on the USU study that I'm guessing, but I think it's about that, and maybe less now. But there are also kittens in that study that are wearing collars that just transmit to the mother. But those, they usually fall off before they get too old. The BYU study that's just starting in central, what have you got? 10. So there'd be an additional 10 collared lions in the central part of the state.
Okay, so let's say even that there are 30 collared cats in the state in studies currently. And I know that you don't use population as like a parameter for permits. But you also said that there are more mountain lions now than maybe ever in the state, or at least equivalent to what it's been at the highest number. So I'm wondering, like, how I feel like there's a lot of discussion about collared cats, but I don't feel like 30 is a really big sample size for a population that you're saying is significantly high. I just want to make sure I understand, like, what kind of numbers we're talking about.
So the objective of the USU study was to look at the survival, and particularly kitten survival. And so we give an estimate of reproduction, how often do they reproduce, and build upon it to estimate population. So that's their goal. The other study is looking at something different. So the collars, it depends on the study, but the collars that have been out, for USU was to try to develop a model for some regions of different objectives, but and we hope they can do that with the sample they've had. The goal for them was to have 10 per unit during the course of the data collection, and on some units they were able to do that, others they weren't. That's the USU. So does that help answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe the point I'm getting to is changing our amendment based on collared cats really worthwhile if what I also heard you say was that we have the highest population of mountain lions that in the state than we've had in a really long time. So I'm just curious about what that looks like. Like Jamie, I'm not a hunter, and so I want to make sure that I understand all of the parameters as we're sort of making these amendments and decisions. Like, I come from a research background also, and so I think there's a lot of value in research. And so I just want to make sure that research in predators isn't being compromised negatively without a good reason, I guess maybe is. So I appreciate your answers. Thanks for explaining that to me and taking the extra time. Sorry to everyone who has to suffer through mine and Jamie's questions all night long.
I just have a comment that, Ben, I would like to be involved in the cougar trapping and collaring next time.
Yeah, I'll make sure he calls you on that. I was going to comment on.
Can I ask one more question? Am I killing you, Ben? That was like like Jamie killing you. These cougars that are preying on livestock, does the division like give reparations to the owners of those livestock?
Yes, Jamie. So we do have a depredation fund, and we do compensate for losses that we can confirm. And so the way that generally works is if a producer finds a dead animal, they'll call Wildlife Services out, which is the federal agency that works in that area. They'll confirm or determine what it was that killed the animal, and then based on that, we'll pay at the end of our fiscal year. That again doesn't account for animals that simply don't come off the mountain and just disappear. And we actually just completed a study with USU to look at cause-specific mortality of lambs on several units. So we're definitely interested in looking at what happens to the lambs that don't get found. And we've gotten a little bit of that from the USU study too. So we're very interested in that.
Thank you. I'm done.
Okay, Randy.
I apologize for adding to this, but for the newer members that are on the board, the collar thing just isn't even on the agenda. It's something we beat the hell out of every couple of years. The board just passed this 3 months ago. It's in the 3-year plan. It's not changing. Just throwing it out there. That's not on the agenda right now. And it just got added as part of the 3-year plan.
I think it's not on the agenda, but it is something that could be discussed. But I think with wildlife board members that are present, they're hearing the discussion, even if there wasn't a motion made. I think the discussion's there, but that is the purpose of the meeting, for things to be brought up. And so, but you are correct. It's not on the agenda, and it was just passed. And attending the last meeting, I think with all parties involved, it as far as the plan goes, it went pretty well. I felt like there was common grounds for a lot of people. It's still something that can be discussed, I believe, but ultimately, wildlife board does make the decisions.
I just listen.
Yes.
If the RAC board will remember when we voted on this, we actually know taking the food out of the area. I believe it's 73. And then it's overridden by the wildlife board. And that's fine. I just don't see any logical reason to protect these animals now for a 3-year period. The studies are finished.
And the year before that, we passed it by the same margin not to take it.
They weren't on it. They weren't on
All right.
it. Anyway.
Okay. We've had the discussion. We've got opinions, and we'll be able to vote on this. Do we have any? We don't have any more comments or discussion. I'd entertain a motion. Junior.
Mr. Chairman, I just move that we amend that, that we try and amend that recommendation of the board that we allow to take these collared cats that are in areas that studies are terminated.
I second it.
Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat that? It was really hard to hear.
Move that we amend the recommendations by the wildlife board or the law that's in place to allow us to take these collared cougars in the terminated, where the studies have been terminated in those areas. Specifically ours.
Would we accept the remainder as presented? So we have a motion by Junior and a second by David Earl. Any discussion before I call for the vote?
Can we restate the motion, please?
Here, I'll have Ben, will you do that, please?
Yep. Motion by Junior Gorey, second by David Earl to allow the take of collar lions in areas where studies have been terminated.
Where studies have ended?
Terminated, ended, no longer being conducted.
Is that clear? Okay, I'll call for a vote. David Earl.
Yes.
Brad Buchanan.
Yes.
Randy Hutchinson. No. Kevin McLeod. No. Mike Lauder.
Yes.
Junior Dwayne.
Yes.
Casey Snyder.
Yes.
Matt Clark.
Yes.
Nikki Wayman.
I don't know. Is that an answer?
Not an answer. Think about it, and I can go back.
I will. Yes, please. Is that okay? Thanks.
Darren.
Yes.
Danny Butler.
No.
Paul Chase.
No.
Nikki.
No.
All right, what do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 yeses and 5 no. The motion passes 7-5. This time we can go through for our reasons for voting against. Randy?
I don't, it's okay if 5 cougars live. We don't have to kill them all.
Kevin?
I think we've discussed it in other meetings, and it's those colored animals are there for a study. And unless the board or the division determines that and then open it up, I don't think we need to have some rule that says, kill these cats. Let the division decide that.
Okay. Nikki,
Yeah, I agree. I feel like we just said 5 minutes ago that that wasn't part of what we were deciding on, and then we made an amendment to change the motion, and so it felt. I don't think that that's actually what we were supposed to vote on, and I think, again, coming from a research background, I think unless the division is telling us that those cats are not being used for research for whatever reason, I just think it's a slippery slope to make that allowable.
and Jamie.
I agree. From a research standpoint, I don't see a compelling reason to change the rule. And I think there's already, if there was an issue with like livestock producers, it seems like that's been taken out of the equation. And so they can, if they're killing livestock, that they're able to take care of that. So I don't think there's a compelling reason.
Okay, thank you. I need. Oh, Paul, sorry.
That's okay. Most of what I was thinking has already been covered, but like I say, this just went through the wildlife board 3 months ago, so it seems like we should let it go a bit longer.
Okay. Question to that. I should have clarified this before. We're done with this agenda item. We need to have the remainder of that. As if it was amended, that was just added to, so we did accept the remainder as presented.
We still have to.
Oh, we still need to. Okay. So we still have the remainder of the agenda item on the table. Any more discussion or motion?
Make a motion to accept the remainder as presented.
A motion by Brad to accept the remainder as presented. On second.
I'll second.
Second by Randy Hutchinson. Any discussion before I call for a vote? Oh, you couldn't see, I left the room. David?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Randy? Yes. Kevin?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Junior?
Yes.
Casey?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Nikki?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
And Paul?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you everyone for your discussion. We'll now go to our last item on the agenda. This is R 675-33, the Black Bear Rules Amendment and recommendations for 2022. And also we have Darren here to answer any questions. We'll begin with questions from members of the RAC for Darren concerning this agenda item.
Chairman, this is Paul in Salt Lake. If we could pause one moment, we're having a technical issue with the microphones. Mike, would you mind checking the laptop? We may need to have you exit out of the meeting and reattach. The audio distortion is definitely impacting the intelligibility. If we could pause for 1 minute.
Can we take a 5-minute break?
I second that.
All right. 5 minutes. We're going to start the meeting back up. Are we good on transmission? All right.
Thank you.
Volume, everything is working? Okay. We're at our final agenda item, which is, again, the Black Bear Rule Amendment and recommendations for 2022. We have Darren, our mammals coordinator, up here, and at this time, he's available for questions first from members of the RAC. Do we have any questions concerning this agenda item? We got, hold on. Oh. Got a couple board members out there. I just realized. I didn't notice you weren't here. No one even noticed you were missing. Come on. Oh. He was looking for caffeine out there earlier. The way he's running around, I think he found it. All right. Questions for members of the RAC for this agenda item? Matt.
Yeah, so Darren, can you clarify your rationale for splitting out the bait and the hound season on some units but not others?
Yeah, we had we have an issue that seems to arise every year that we do bears, and it's a law enforcement concern primarily. During our fall bear season, a person can have a permit that allows them both to have a bait station and to hunt with dogs. But you're not allowed to use dogs from a bait station. And so it's certainly a concern. And so the one recommendation to make a person choose one or the other in the fall is a result of some of those concerns. We also talk more generally about the same concept, and that is that when you have bait, this proposal today wouldn't solve this, but when you have bait and hounds in the field at the same time, it can put both parties in a weird situation where they could be in jeopardy for a violation. And that is, for example, if you're running hounds up a draw, the rule says you can't intentionally start your dogs off of bait, or if you encounter bait, you have to cease pursuit. If you're a houndsman and you are in a high bear density area and you don't know where the bait stations are, but there are baits out there and that your dogs are likely to encounter them. We've had a handful of houndsmen express concerns to our law enforcement officers in the field that puts them in a weird place. And on the bait side, we do hear complaints every year from bait hunters that are concerned about hounds coming into their baits and messing up their hunt, or just concerned that hounds are even there around their baits. And so we looked at this from a state. This is an issue statewide, but not on every unit in the state. There's some units with low bear densities and not a lot of hunters in a field where that conflict doesn't seem to arise. Northern region is one part of the state where our officers, there aren't a lot of bears. They just don't see these kind of issues as much as they do in the southeastern, southern, northeastern part of the state. I sat down with law enforcement, some of our investigators who were talking to our law enforcement folks statewide. And they said, you know what, we'd like to see this addressed in the plan. Right now, there are some particular areas that we're really struggling with, and those are the units that we're recommending making some changes on in the spring. And so that's the South Slope Bonanza, Diamond Mountain Vernal, South Slope Yellowstone, Wasatch Mountain, Avennequin, Current Creek. And that's the result of those discussions. So just for me, the council, the bear plan does expire in 2023. And so our intent is to establish a bear committee and to go back into the plan. And when we're at the end of this next 3-year cycle in 2024, bring plan amendments or new plan, or however that discussion shakes out. So we didn't want to make huge changes this time around. We wanted to save that for the plan process, but we did have some hot areas identified by our law enforcement, and those units are represented in these recommendations. And on Book Cliffs, Bitter Creek South, those season dates are the same as they have been, but we're recommending not having an overlap between bait and hounds in the early and late portions of that season. And other than that, our season dates are pretty much the same as they were during the last 3-year cycle. Does that help, Matt? That was a long answer.
Well, I appreciate the answer. Does the division have a position on whether the RAC says yay or nay statewide on your proposal? I mean, I guess this is coming from my concern is that I don't want to have like 50 different management units with 50 different sets of rules.
Yeah, one of my goals with this plan revision process is really to simplify this. Bear hunting is incredibly complicated, and for me, and I look at it all the time, and I can't imagine what someone picking up a guidebook and trying to figure it out thinks about figuring out what he's or she is putting in for and all the regulations. So we definitely want to do that. That's certainly something that's going to take several discussions over a period of time. And so right now we're recommending some small changes to address some issues that were identified by our law enforcement as particular concern right now. And then as far as statewide, I think my preference would be to wait for the plan process to really dig into it, decide what we want to do, and try to be more consistent statewide through a plan rather than sort of nibbling around the edges. Does that help, Matt?
It does. Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the RAC?
I know one of the objectives in the memorandum is to define spot and stock. And so I'm just curious if you could help me maybe understand the difference between, or define what spot and stock means versus like the summer pursuit season. Like what's the difference between like a regular season? Sorry, I know that you're fine. No,
that's a good question. And the reason we decided we needed to define it is so spot and stock hunt is a hunt where you can't use either bait or hounds to hunt. So you have to hike in glass and find a bear. And if you're going to harvest a bear, you have to do it without the aid of bait and hounds. We've had this hunt in place for a few years now, and we're noticing in our harvest data that people with these permits were saying they were using dogs and bait, which is illegal. But apparently they didn't know because they were telling us that they did it. And so we wanted to make it clear in our rule and guidebook what this hunt is. We thought it was clear. We just wanted to clarify it. So a spot and stock hunt is a hunt without the aid of dogs or bait. And then the other hunts, depending on the season and location, would allow one or both methods, depending on the season and the unit. Does that help, Nikki?
It helps tremendously. I feel like Jamie and I just need to have a meeting with you outside of our RAC meetings.
It confuses me too, but yeah, we probably should.
I was going to ask you the same thing. Like, can I call you tomorrow and have you draw me a picture of how this whole thing works?
I have a very detailed spreadsheet of all the seasons and how they line up. That'll you go cross-eyed.
We love a spreadsheet, so that might be right up our alley.
We can do that. I can certainly share that with you.
Randy.
Hey, just to address, so I was trying to read a letter during the break and stuff regarding this subject. In general, can you tell us the health? Well, okay, so I've never hunted bear in Utah, so I have in other states. Do all bears that are harvested, are they checked?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so every bear that's taken has to be checked, and that includes bears taken by wildlife services, and then if any kind of bears that could fall into our hands from some other form of mortality, road kill or something like that, we try to document and age every bear that we come across that dies.
When those bears are checked, and especially in the spring, how frequently are sows that are nursing taken?
I could get that for you. I don't have that off the top of my head. We do look at
Big,
nipple
small,
condition.
you don't need an exact number.
It's
Just,
small,
is it an
it's
issue?
not large, but occasionally we do see that, yeah.
And then how about the ages of the bears? Are they declining, staying the same, or increasing?
It's remaining fairly stable over time. Just looking at all the data points, it looks like if you look at the population reconstruction model, that we may be at a peak, but we only have one data point that shows a decline so far, and so we may be at a peak and starting down, but it's still too early to say on that. Statewide, the plan requires us to make sure that when you compile all of the data statewide, that we're in that stable, moderate hunting parameter zone, and that's where we are there too. And so unit by unit, we look at the females in the harvest and the 5-year-old males and older, and make decisions within the plan guidelines there. And we did that with all of our recommendations this time around. So it looks like it's stable. It certainly looks like similar to cougars, that we've grown a lot of bears over the last decade, and we've seen bears in the new areas. And we were just able to collar 2 sows on the cache, which, when I started as a district biologist, we were just starting to see some bears show up on that unit. And now we're able to catch 2 of them, put collars on, and watch what they're doing. So we've got bears.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from members of the RAC before I turn to questions from the public? All right, do we have questions from members of the public for Darren at this time? All right, I'll go with Kurt, correct? And then we'll go to Corey. Okay.
Hi, Darren.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Regarding the camera issue, and specifically bear baiting, if the Wildlife Board adopts the idea that you guys voted for here, how would that affect using cameras for bear baiting?
Right now, Kirk, we're proposing to mirror the season that's established by big game. And that's primarily to avoid a loophole where someone could say, well, this camera's here for bears or lions, it's not here for big game. And so in the spring or the summer baiting season, it's outside of that
Okay.
restricted time, so it wouldn't affect it. They could.
So there's no baiting inside that period?
Well, there is in the fall, yeah. So to the extent that people want to use bait in the fall, they'd be prohibited from using cameras. But in the summer, that before
Okay.
July, they could use them.
Just want to make sure we all knew that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Corey.
Corey Huntsman. And I apologize, this question isn't exactly to do with the agenda, but why I have law enforcement man Darren here, I thought it might be an appropriate time to ask. On the southeastern units where you can't chase lions without a valid bear tag, if a hunter has a bear tag, this happened to me this year. We filled his bear tag and he had a valid lion tag, but he already killed his bear. Could we keep hunting to try and kill a lion?
I'm gonna let. Do you think you can answer that, Wyatt?
If it's,
I know what I want to say. I'm gonna let you.
and I don't know that, I'd have to personally dive into rule. I'm not super familiar with this regulation, but when we have other cow tags and you fill like a controlled cow tag, when you fill your buck tag, you can continue to hunt that cow. I don't want to speak to that right now, but that's certainly something we can try to look into real quick and get an answer for it, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay, no hurry.
So Corey, and I would just say that these are season dates established in rule, and it doesn't speak to whether it just says you have to have a valid. I think it says you have to have a valid bear permit.
Whether it's punched or not.
Right. So that's a good question. We probably ought to make sure we're all on the same page on that. But from a biological standpoint, you're there, you're hunting. But the concern is that someone shows up and they're hunting lions, but they're chasing and treeing bears. And if you filled your bear tag, and you don't have a pursuit permit, you might run afoul of, if you get a bear in a tree and you don't have any, you've already filled your tag and you don't have the proper permit. I think if you had a pursuit permit, you'd be fine. But yeah, we probably ought to clarify that.
Any other questions from the public? Okay, I'll turn some time over to Ben right now to read us the survey results.
Same as the last item on the public comment, we had 3 people respond. 1 was strongly agree, 2 neither agreed nor disagreed. But we also have a letter from the Humane Society, which each of you have gotten a copy of today, and I'll let them speak to their letter.
All right, we'll at this time go to some comment cards. I have 2 of them from the public. We'll start with Kirk Robinson first.
Okay, thank you. Kirk Robinson. I am the founder and executive director of Western Wildlife Conservancy. It's a small Utah-based organization. By way of background, briefly, I was born in Utah, raised in Bountiful in the 50s and the 60s. I've never been much of a hunter, but I have backpacked and floated rivers all around the West. So I've gotten pretty familiar with the geography, and of course I love it like all of us do. Now I'm coming at some of these issues quite differently from some of you. And so before I get into my comments, I just want to say this is not personal. What I have to say, you may not like it, but that's fine. But since I am a Utah citizen and have a legitimate right and have my own opinions on these issues, and take the trouble to attend these meetings and to educate myself on the issues, I appreciate your being here to listen. And before I go a step further, I don't think I've ever heard anybody thank the law enforcement at DWR. They probably have at some time or other. But I'm impressed at what a great job they do with a small staff. I wish we could double that. Anyway, these are just general comments, but one thing I've noticed all the time since I've been coming to these meetings, which actually I attended Board of Big Game, whatever it was, back in 1989 and early 90s before the RAC Wildlife Board system was instituted. And so it goes back a long ways. But everybody assumes that the only issue when it comes to hunting and trapping is the population of the species that's being hunted or trapped. Is it going to be damaged in some way? Nobody seems to be concerned about individual animals, unless it happens to be a case like the bear that was chased to exhaustion. Then suddenly that becomes a great big issue, which it should be, I agree, and that's why I thought of law enforcement a moment ago. But nobody ever talks about pain and suffering and emotional distress of animals. Bears, for instance, are highly intelligent animals. They do experience emotions, and they care for their young, and they've got 5 senses. Most of their senses are more developed than ours. Why do we presume that it's all right to kill 500 of them a year for sport? Just going to leave that hanging. That just concerns me. It never gets discussed in these meetings, ever. I don't think it gets thought about. Same thing for mountain lions. What about the population of these animals when so many of them are killed? What's happening internally? And how is it affecting development of young animals? You know, there's a whole lot of studies since 2000 that shows that while the mountain lion populations that are overhunted produce a lot of errant teenage cats that get into trouble and cause a lot of the very same problems that many of the rationales for hunting are supposed to correct. I'd like to see these studies read and discussed at some point, but I never do. And one other point, I know my time is limited, but if we're going to be philosophically concerned about these issues, as Matt it appears to be Matt Clark. Fair chase was mentioned. A big deal was made out of it. It's supposed to be an ethic. Why do we have bear baiting at all? That's not fair chase. No argument can be made that's not simply laughable that that's fair chase. I grant that it takes certain skills and effort, but it's not fair chase. Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kirk. Next, I have Sunday's Hunt.
Hi, my name's Sunday's Hunt. I'm the Utah State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. Tonight, I'm here to respectfully deliver these comments on behalf of our supporters in the state. Unlike almost any other state, Utah allows multiple black bear hunting seasons, including in the springtime when mother bears are coming out of their dens with young cubs. Utah also allows the unsporting use of bait and hounds. Spring and summer hunts, baits, and hounds are not fair chase hunting methods and should not be permitted. In a state survey, most Utahns, including most hunters, oppose hounding and baiting bears. The Utah Division of Wildlife Resources permits multiple hunting seasons starting in April and ending in November. The liberal amount of hunting in Utah is simply dangerous for black bear conservation, as bears cannot withstand such high levels of hunting. In 2020, hunters killed a record 467 bears, the most in over a decade. This will not permit this level of killing, especially as we head into hotter and drier summers with increasing fire dangers in the West. It's also important to note that this number does not include the numbers of bears killed each year for other reasons, including poaching. Bears reproduce incredibly slowly, therefore, we must manage them conservatively. For example, a female black bear is not an adult until she is 4 to 5 years old. Then she will only give birth to a few litters in her lifetime, but only every 2 or 3 years, and only about 50% of those cubs will survive their first year. In spring and summer, hunters kill mother bears, resulting in orphan cubs. Spring hunts occur when bears are physically stressed after months of eating nothing while in the den, and hunting bears in early summers know better because orphan cubs are under 1 year will likely die from starvation, predation, or exposure. Utah also allows up to 16 dogs to pursue a single bear. This amounts in mayhem in Utah's Utah backcountry. Hounding is dangerous for bears, cubs, and the hounds themselves. The hounds may confront bears while they are still on the ground, resulting in injuries or death to bears and especially to cubs. Hounds injured by bears can suffer broken bones, punctured lungs, or even be sliced open. Hounding black bears during hot weather causes heat, stress to both bears and the hounds. Overheated bears, because of their thick coats and the fat layers they build to survive hibernation, can die from these chases. If the bear is pregnant, she could lose her embryos. Because hounds run across long distances, they invariably pursue and stress non-target animals, including elk and deer. Baiting bears is equally problematic. Bear bait sites attract many species, most of whom are not bears. Bait sites also concentrate bears, putting young bears in harm's way because adult bears may prey upon cubs or small bears. Spoiled baits or baits containing chocolate or caffeine are also toxic and even fatal to bears and other wildlife. Utah even allows hunters to use domestic livestock or their body parts for bait. This is just a recipe for disaster because it teaches bears, coyotes, and cougars to associate livestock as a food source. Bait sites concentrate wildlife of different species and thus increase potential for disease and parasite transmission between species, especially rabies and chronic wasting disease, and potentially mange. For all of these reasons, we respectfully urge the RAC to request that the Wildlife Commissions change its hunting regulations so they match the values of our citizens who do not approve of these controversial killing methods on our beloved Utah bears. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sunday. And I mentioned to her, as to the other groups, is as a RAC, we appreciate when we receive these prior to the meetings too. You were able to read it within the 5 minutes and it worked, but it does appreciative if any groups, if you have statements or anything, we like to get them a few days prior to the meeting, so it gives us opportunity to read them and to also verify, so thank you. Do we have any?
Yes, and I thought I turned the card in for this one.
I must have missed it. Go ahead.
Corey Huntsman, I represent the Housing Association. I do apologize. I dropped the ball and did not submit a letter. This time I usually do, and I didn't. We approved most of the division's proposal, other than the season changes on the spring bear hunts. Cutting Memorial Day out for the hound hunt, we'd like to see that stay in place. That's been a long-standing tradition since the spring bear hunt has been introduced. We do understand the frustrations from law enforcement trying to enforce these incidental occurrences where the hounds are running through the baits. It is a short period of time. We pulled a grammar request and we didn't see any actual citations for this. So we think it's more of a social issue. So we'd like to ask that we form a working group to work with the bait hunters and law enforcement in the division and table this motion until next year when the plan's due anyway. We don't want to see the bait hunters get their season cut short either. I do think we can work with both communities and come up with a solution that works for everyone. But the only other concern, and it's not really a proposal, I guess, just a concern to be aware of, the fall hunts, if we split up the bait and the hound hunts, make them separate draws. I don't know about you guys, but every time I've drawn a tag, I have 10 buddies telling me they're going to come help. And when it's time to hunt, nobody's around. I'd hate to see a guy put in for a hound hunt and then the houndsman flakes on him and he's stuck with the bait tag that he didn't want, or he doesn't have the option to bait. That's just one thing to think about on splitting those types of tags. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. Did I miss any other cards? Okay, this time I'll turn, we already had we did that, didn't we? Okay. Now we'll go to, did we already do the surveys, didn't we? Okay, we're going to go to RAC discussion at this time, discussion and comments. I almost made it without screwing up the order, almost.
Just real quick, Kirk and Sunday. I don't think there's a hunter out there that harvests an animal that they don't have a care for. And if they are out there doing it, they shouldn't be. Kirk, I understand the emotion. I'm almost 70 years old, and I've learned to, and I've always respected the animals that I've taken through my life. But I also love hunting. And, but I just want you both to know that we do hear you. And socially and emotionally, it weighs on all of us. And we have to live with one another. But I just want you to know that we do respect your thoughts and opinions.
Thank you. I really appreciate you saying that.
Matt.
Yes, so I guess I have two comments. I mean, one comment is that I'm concerned about making rules for individual units versus making statewide rules. I mean, this came up at the central meeting last night. They voted to table this because they had a similar concern, and I don't want to see different rules for each individual unit. I would personally be in favor of tabling this to the committee to let them do their thing. And I guess the second issue that I have is that, and I'm having a little bit of a brain fart right now. I'm just going to leave it at the first one, actually. Thank you.
Now I have a question for Darren. If we were, what would be the implications if this was tabled and no decision was made today?
We just adjust the dates for the calendar and just leave the season structure as it was last year. And again, this is a 3-year recommendation. So the idea would be this would be in place for the next 3 years. In the meantime, we'd have the planning process and then bring that back when we do the big bear recommendation again in 3 years.
Any other discussion, comments, motions?
This is, I guess, a point of clarification, and I've already forgot your name anyway. He brought up no record of any citations being given. Is that, can we?
Yeah, so we've had different issues over the year with the common theme. The grammar request was on the LaSalle and San Juan specifically. They do have a different hunt structure to try to address, and primarily there was a crowding issue, just a very popular unit. And the board made some changes to non-resident pursuit permits and sort of address this. But yeah, the result of the grammar request is there weren't, I don't think there were any citations, but our officers don't always, just because a citation isn't written doesn't necessarily reflect the magnitude of the problem. And so the feedback I got from our officers is if we could fix this, it would really make our lives easier. But, we've been living with it for some time now, and we can certainly work within the parameters. We got 50 officers statewide, and if they have to spend a lot of time investigating things that are just misunderstandings or, not really big time problems, they only have so many hours in the day. And so we like to try to make our regulations, make their lives as easy as possible while allowing for opportunity as well. So that's the balance we try to strike.
Just touch on the grammar request. I didn't see the specific grammar request or how it was worded, but similar to the question you posed about the severity of charges, this could go anywhere from a rule violation to third-degree felony. Class A misdemeanors, third-degree felonies have to be filed with the court system, and we can issue a citation. So if the request was specific to citations, it wouldn't have captured those that we had to screen through the courts.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yes, I guess this is what I'm getting at, is that we've, over the last 6 or 7 years that I've been here, we've got a different hotspot in a different unit every year. And I'm looking for more of a global solution to this problem than putting out this little fire and that little fire each individual year.
Chair, can I ask a question to Darren? Just
sure.
Procedurally, the RAC has talked about potentially tabling. Would a denial of the division's recommendation be the more appropriate?
What, or just recommend something different. Last night what Central Region did was just remain with the current season structure and pass the remainder. Trying to remember, I think that the balance was passed as is.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So in layman's terms, we'd rather be reject the proposal and come up with a suggestion.
Except there are other elements.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Darren's right. That's why I wanted to ask the question. I want to make sure we're not punting on all the other things. So I think the language he recommended would be appropriate.
Nikki's your hand up.
Well, I think Ben actually just answered my question. I was trying to determine what the right decision was, tabling it or changing the language, because in my understanding of the request is not only addressing the seasons, but also addressing the number of permits. Is that correct?
Ken was involved in this one too.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the discussion we're talking about is the hunt structure and season date recommendations so the motion would be to, if that's the direction that the RAC wants to go, would be to deny the division's season date and hunt structure recommendations and then pass the remaining balance of the division recommendations. Is that right, Darren?
I think there are really probably three specific things. There's some deep season date changes on those south slopes and the Wasatch Adenequin unit. It sounds like the RAC might want to consider just leaving as they currently are. There's a requirement to choose either bait or hound permit in the fall. And the only other change from what we've been doing is on the Book Cliffs, Bitter Creek South to separate hounds and bait. Currently, you start early, you can use either. During the middle part of that season, it's bait only, and then at the end. So probably the easiest thing to do, if the RAC wanted to remain the way we currently are, just recommend that we stay that way, and then address the balance of the recommendations, either in a separate motion or.
Comments or questions as to what Darren just shared? Is anyone prepared to make a motion? Can I help clarify this a little bit then? If there's no discussion and we don't have any issues with what's there, then we go with it, or if we don't have one, I mean.
I'm okay with the proposals. I mean, we've got a 3-year plan. We're trying to get it through. We've got to quit making changes every 3 months to things. My motion would be to accept the recommendations as made.
So I have a motion to make to accept the recommendations as presented.
Second.
And a second from, we'll go over a clarification. I think I have a second from Kevin. We'll have some discussion. Paul?
Well, I was going to second it, but I was beaten to the punch, so I'm good.
Okay. Was there any other discussion to the motion?
This is, excuse me, this is Matt Clark again. I guess I'm just not okay having individual regulations for individual units. I'd like to see some kind of uniform plan.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second on the table. Is this a comment, Jamie?
I guess I kind of feel unprepared to vote. Is it appropriate for me to abstain if I don't? I kind of can't wrap my head around all of these different parts.
That is an option, yes. So
Okay.
as we call for a vote, you can say abstain.
Okay, thank you.
So, Nikki.
Sorry, like Jamie and I are the tag team duo of the meeting. So it's my understanding that the proposal as it is, or the motion as it is to recommend the permits for each unit, as well as the seasons related to bait and hound or non-bait and hound, like the different categories. Is that, okay. I just want to make sure, like Jamie, I'm trying to wrap my mind around all of these things. And I kind of understand what Matt is saying as well about creating individual recommendations for each unit. But again, not to be dense, but don't we do that already for big game? Like each unit has different numbers of permits and takes. Is that true?
We do. But that's not really, maybe I'm stepping into this a little bit, but it's not so much that the numbers that we're concerned about. It's just that the method in one area of the state would be different than another method of the state. So Matt's concern is just to make, he'd like to see more uniformity, I guess would be the word, and to not have it be so difficult, not, having to really know when you're in one unit to the next, that the rules would change a little. Does that help?
Oh, I see. Oh, so what you're saying is like the South Slope, for example, has a different spring hound season date than maybe the book list does.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for clarifying that. That helps me understand what it is that we're trying to solve.
All right. We still have that motion on the table in a second, so I'm going to call for a vote at this time. I'll begin. David Earl.
Yes.
Brad Buchanan.
Yes.
Randy Hutchinson.
Yes.
Kevin McLeod. I got a yes from Randy. Kevin McLeod.
Yes.
Mike Lauder.
Yes.
Junior Goring.
Yes.
Casey Snyder. Matt Clark.
No.
Nikki Wayment.
Yes.
Darren Perry.
Yes.
Jamie Butler.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. And Paul Chase.
Yes.
Motion passes 1, 2, what is it? 10 to 1 with one abstention. Matt, I'll give you the opportunity. I think we know, but if you'd like to share one last time.
Yeah, not to beat a dead horse, but I mean, this just gets more complicated every year, and I feel like we should have a more uniform rule. That's the only reason that I'm opposing this.
Thank you. And Jamie, you stated yours, but would you please, for the record, once more?
Yeah, I'm going to be calling you guys to learn more about this and try to understand it better before I make a vote.
All right. Okay.
Chair, can I just make a comment for Jamie real quick?
Yes.
That I really respect and appreciate what you guys are going through in your second meeting on the RAC. This is really complicated, like Darren said. I wish I had made this offer sooner, but I would be happy to facilitate a sit-down meeting with the two of you and me and Darren and just hammer through this until you guys have a better understanding. It would help me, it would help Darren. I think it would help all of us.
That would be great.
Yeah, I'll take you up on that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks for being there.
for sure.
I'd add that for all RAC members. I've found that every employee of the division, if they haven't answered my phone, have called back after a message, and I appreciate that. That is one thing that they do as we are with our capacity as RAC members, that they're quite available and always good to help. So I invite all of you to take advantage of that. I got to get back. That is our last agenda item. So do I need to call for a motion to end the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn? All in favor? Any not in favor?
Bye.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
See y'all.